Welcome back to Dark Horror Narrations. Tonight we're traveling deep into the Mojave Desert, one of the most isolated, unforgiving landscapes in North America. The kind of place where cell signals die, where help is measured in hours instead of minutes, and where the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat echoing back from the darkness. Over the next few hours, you'll hear 5 accounts from people who ventured into the Mojave's most desolate corners and discovered something watching from the shadows. A geologist trapped in a volcanic lava tube during a sandstorm. A photographer whose campfire cast shadows that didn't obey the laws of physics. A stranded driver who watched something approach his truck across 4 days of isolation. A botanist who realized the shadow in his tent was learning to become him. And an astrophotographer whose cameras documented something that shouldn't exist on a flat desert lake bed. These aren't supernatural fantasies. They're survival accounts, field reports, the kind of stories that get filed away in incident folders and whispered about by park rangers who've seen too much to dismiss them. Thank you for being here tonight. Whether you're settling in for sleep, working the night shift, or just need some company in the quiet hours, I'm glad you found your way here. Before we begin, I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop a comment and let me know. It's always fascinating to see how far these desert stories travel. Now, find a comfortable position, adjust your volume, let the outside world fade. The Mojave Desert holds a silence so heavy it breathes, and tonight, that silence is calling your name in a voice you almost recognize. As the dunes shift into predatory silhouettes, the line between a peaceful slumber and a waking nightmare begins to dissolve. Close your eyes, but don't listen too closely to the wind. Let's begin. Story 1. The Amboy Crater Watch. I survived 4 days trapped in a lava tube while a sandstorm raged outside, but I wasn't alone in the dark. Something was waiting for me to run out of light. The mistake was thinking I had enough time. I'm a geologist, 40 years old. I've worked remote sites across Nevada, Arizona, and California for the past 15 years. Abandoned mines, volcanic formations, dry lake beds where the alkaline dust coats your lungs if you breathe wrong. I know the Mojave. I know how fast weather can turn. I know the difference between calculated risk and stupidity. What happened at Amboy Crater wasn't stupidity, it was something else. March 19th, 2023. I drove out to Amboy Crater for a routine magnetic survey mapping subsurface lava flow patterns for a university research project out of UC Riverside. The crater sits just off old Route 66 between Barstow and Needles, a near-perfect cinder cone rising 250 feet from the desert floor like a black carbuncle. Volcanic fields surrounding it, lava flows, frozen mid-creep, basalt columns jutting from the ground like broken teeth. The whole formation is maybe 79,000 years old, give or take, young, geologically speaking, still sharp-edged and hostile. I'd been out there twice before for preliminary surveys, knew the access road, knew the trails, knew which slopes were stable and which weren't. This was supposed to be the final data collection run before writing up the report. I parked my truck at the old trailhead around 9:30 a.m. Clear sky, that pale desert blue that hurts to look at, temperature already climbing towards 75 degrees. No wind. Perfect conditions. I could see the crater rim clearly from the parking area, that distinctive dark outline against the lighter basalt flows. My equipment, magnetometer in its hard case, GPS unit, field notebook, geological hammer, hand lens, compass. Water, 3 gallons in the truck bed, 2-liter hydration pack on my back, headlamp with fresh batteries, or so I thought. Spare batteries in a plastic case, 4 AA's that had been in my pack for maybe 6 months, protein bars, trail mix, emergency blanket, satellite phone with 50% charge, first aid kit. I'd done this work 100 times. Standard remote site protocol. The plan was simple. Hike the crater rim clockwise, take magnetometer readings every 50 feet, document any interesting columnar jointing or tube entrances, photograph any unusual flow features. 6-hour survey maximum, back to the truck by 4 p.m., burger in Barstow by 6. Maybe stop at the Baghdad Cafe if I was feeling nostalgic. I started up the trail at 9:45. The path follows an old cinder road before switching back up the outer slope. Easy hiking. The ground crunched under my boots, loose volcanic rock, black and rust red, like walking on chunks of coal and brick. Creosote bushes scattered across the lower slopes, their leaves already curling against the heat. A raven called from somewhere above, harsh and mocking. By 10:15 I'd reached the rim. The view opened up the crater bowl below me, maybe half a mile across, floor covered in broken lava and wind-blown sand. To the west, the old lava flows stretched toward the Bristol Mountains, frozen black waves. To the east, more volcanic features, cinder cones, and pressure ridges marching toward the Colorado River Valley. I set up the first survey point and started taking readings. The work was methodical, almost meditative. Set up tripod, level the magnetometer, take reading, record coordinates, photograph the site, move 50 feet, repeat. The numbers were good, matching my preliminary data. The subsurface flows showed clear directional patterns, exactly what the university wanted. I worked my way around the rim, stopping every 50 feet. Took my time, checked my equipment. The sun climbed higher. The temperature pushed into the 80s. I drank water regularly, kept my neck covered with a bandana, applied sunscreen to my forearms. By 11, I was halfway around the rim, on the north side now, looking down at the steeper inner slopes. The wind picked up around 11. At first, it was just a breeze, warm and dry, coming from the west. Normal desert thermal wind. But within 10 minutes, it had strengthened, gusting hard enough to rattle my equipment. I looked up from my notebook. The western horizon had changed. What had been clear blue sky an hour ago was now a yellow-brown smear, thick and towering like someone had smudged charcoal across the distance. I could see it advancing, a wall of churned atmosphere, maybe 3,000 feet high, eating the landscape as it came. Haboob. Full dust storm. I checked my phone. No signal out here, hadn't had bars since I'd left the interstate. But the barometer app showed atmospheric pressure dropping fast, from 30.1 to 2 to 29.8 to 5 in the span of 15 minutes. That kind of drop meant serious weather. I checked my watch. 11:07 a.m. I did the math. I was on the north rim, opposite side of the crater from my truck. The trail back was roughly 3 miles, most of it exposed slope and open desert. At a good pace, jogging where I could, I might make it in 40 minutes. The storm was maybe 30 minutes out, moving at 30 to 40 miles per hour. I wasn't going to make it. Even if I ran flat out, I'd be caught in the open with zero visibility, loose cinders underfoot, and wind strong enough to knock me down. Trying to navigate in those conditions was how people got lost and died within 100 yards of safety. I'd read the incident reports, knew the statistics. I needed shelter. Immediately. The smart options were limited. The crater bowl itself offered no protection, just open ground and scattered rocks. The rim was exposed to the full force of wind. There were no structures, no caves, no overhangs. But there were lava tubes. I had spotted 3 during the survey. Small ones, mostly. Collapsed or partially filled. Unstable. The kind you don't go into without proper equipment and backup. Except one. I pulled out my field notebook, flipped to my morning notes. Survey point 18, north slope, roughly 200 feet below the rim. Large tube entrance, 8 feet wide, intact roof, no signs of recent rockfall. I had photographed it around 10:30, marked it for a potential follow-up study. It was maybe 300 yards from my current position. I looked at the approaching storm. The front edge was clear now, a churning brown wall advancing across the desert floor. I could hear it, a low roar building in the distance, like heavy surf. 20 minutes, maybe less. I grabbed my pack, slung the magnetometer case over my shoulder, and started down the slope. The ground was treacherous, loose cinders and broken lava, every step threatening to slide. I half ran, half skidded, using my geological hammer as a makeshift brake. The wind was building, gusting hard enough now to throw dust in my face. I pulled my bandana up over my nose and mouth. 15 minutes. I could see the tube entrance below me. A dark rectangular opening in the black basalt looked stable from above. The roof was solid rock, maybe 2 feet thick. The entrance faced southeast, partially sheltered from the prevailing westerly wind. It would work. It had to work. I scrambled the last 100 feet, boots skidding, small rocks clattering down ahead of me. The entrance was bigger than I'd thought, roughly 6 feet high and 8 feet wide, opening into darkness. Cool air breathed out from the interior, that stable underground temperature that doesn't shift with the surface. Behind me, the sky had gone yellow-brown. The roar was louder now, that freight train sound that meant the wall was close. I clicked on my headlamp and stepped inside. The tube extended back into solid darkness, walls smooth and ropey from the old lava flow, floor relatively flat, scattered with small rocks but navigable. I could stand upright, maybe 12 feet wide. The ceiling curved overhead in that distinctive tube shape, rounded, organic, like being inside a fossilized artery. Behind me, the wind began to scream. I moved 30 feet into the tube, far enough to escape the initial dust blast, close enough to still see the entrance as a dim gray circle. I set my pack down, pulled out the emergency blanket, and wrapped it around my shoulders. The temperature in the tube was maybe 55 degrees, comfortable enough for now. The storm hit like a physical thing. One moment I could see the entrance. The next, the world outside disappeared into churning brown chaos. The wind howled across the tube opening, creating a low whistling moan that echoed deeper into the tunnel. Dust billowed in, reducing visibility to maybe 10 feet. I turned off my headlamp to save batteries, sat down against the smooth wall, waited. Sandstorms like this usually blow through in 2 to 4 hours. Uncomfortable but survivable. I had water. I had light. I had communication. The satellite phone might not work underground, but if I needed to, I could move to the entrance and send a distress signal. I checked my watch. 11:53 a.m. The wind screamed. Dust settled on everything. I pulled the emergency blanket over my head and tried to breathe shallow. That's when I noticed the shadow. I wasn't using my headlamp, didn't need to. But the entrance still let in a dim brown glow from the storm outside, enough to make out the tube's basic shape. My eyes had adjusted. There was a shadow on the wall across from me. Not my shadow. Wrong position. I was sitting against the south wall. This shadow was on the north wall, maybe 20 feet deeper into the tube. It was human-shaped, upright, motionless. I stared at it for a long moment, running through explanations. Rock formation catching weird light, my mind filling in patterns. Pareidolia, the human brain's obsession with finding faces and figures in random shapes. I clicked on my headlamp. The shadow vanished. I swept the beam across the north wall. Smooth, basalt. No formations, no irregularities that would cast that kind of silhouette. I aimed the light deeper into the tube-empty tunnel, stretching back into darkness, curving out of sight maybe 60 feet in. Nothing there. I turned off the headlamp, sat in the dim stormlight. The shadow reappeared. Same spot, same shape. My pulse kicked up, but I forced myself to think through it logically. Light behaved strangely in enclosed spaces. The storm was creating shifting illumination at the entrance. Shadows don't require a light source directly behind them if there's ambient scattered light. It was just an optical effect. I didn't believe myself, but I tried. I checked my watch. 12:15 p.m. The wind howled. I waited. Around 1 p.m., I ate a protein bar and drank some water. The shadow hadn't moved. I'd been checking it every few minutes, trying to catch it shifting, but it remained perfectly still. My satellite phone showed no signal this deep in the tube. I'd need to move closer to the entrance, but the storm outside was still raging, visibility 0, wind strong enough to strip skin. Through the entrance I could see nothing but churning brown, hear nothing but that constant freight train roar. I settled in, pulled my knees up, wrapped the emergency blanket tighter. The The temperature was stable, but the cold was seeping into my bones. 55 degrees doesn't sound that cold, but when you're sitting still for hours, it accumulates. My fingers were starting to stiffen. Exhaustion was creeping in. I'd been up since 5 a.m., hiked 6 miles of rough terrain before the storm hit, scrambled down an unstable slope in panic conditions. The adrenaline spike from the shelter scramble was fading fast. I could feel the crash coming, that heavy-limbed fatigue that makes your eyes close involuntarily. I forced myself to stay alert, did mental math, recited the periodic table, went through the geological timeline, Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, Phanerozoic, anything to keep my mind engaged. The shadow remained motionless on the north wall, 20 feet back. I checked my watch. 1:32 p.m. My neck was getting sore from the tension. I rolled my shoulders, stretched carefully. The tube was silent except for the muffled wind outside. That organic whistling across the entrance had settled into a steady low moan, almost like breathing. I tried to think about the project, the magnetic survey data I'd collected, the patterns in the subsurface flows, whether the university would accept my preliminary conclusions, normal things, professional concerns. But my eyes kept drifting back to that shadow. I checked my watch. 1:58 p.m. Time was moving like cold honey. I ate another protein bar, drank more water, tried to calculate my supplies. 2 liters of water in the hydration pack, maybe 1.5 liters left. 3 protein bars remaining. Trail mix. I could stretch it to 2 days easily if I had to. 3 if I rationed carefully. But I wouldn't be here 3 days. The storm would pass. I'd be out by evening. I let my eyes close for just a moment, just to rest them. When I opened them, the shadow had moved. It was closer, maybe 15 feet into the tube now, still on the north wall, still upright, but it had advanced 5 feet while my eyes were closed. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I clicked the headlamp on immediately, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing there. Empty tube. Smooth basalt wall with those characteristic flow ripples. I kept the light on for a full 2 minutes, sweeping it across every surface, looking for cracks, looking for projections, looking for anything that could explain what I was seeing. The tube was featureless, just smooth volcanic rock. Headlamp off. The shadow stood in its new position, motionless, as if it had always been there, closer, 15 feet back instead of 20. My mouth went dry. I took a drink of water, hands shaking slightly. Forced myself to think through this scientifically. Optical illusion. Had to be. Low light conditions create perceptual distortions. The human visual system isn't designed for darkness. It fills in gaps, creates patterns, generates false images. Add exhaustion and stress, and you get hallucinations. Except this didn't feel like a hallucination. This felt deliberate, calculated, patient. I kept the headlamp on, swept the beam slowly across every surface, looking for any crack, any formation, any logical explanation. The tube was smooth, featureless. There was nothing that could cast that shadow. But when I turned the light off, it reappeared. Closer still. Now maybe 12 feet into the tunnel. It had moved another 3 feet in the darkness. I stood up fast, backing toward the entrance. The storm outside was still chaos. I could hear it, feel the pressure changes, but suddenly being sandblasted seemed preferable to being in here with something that moved in the dark. I was 3 steps toward the entrance when I saw the second shadow. This one was at the entrance itself, blocking the opening, also human-shaped, upright, but larger, maybe 7 feet tall. It stood perfectly still in the dim brown light, silhouetted against the churning dust outside. I froze. Headlamp on, nothing at the entrance but storm. Headlamp off, the shadow returned, filling the opening. Behind me, I could feel the first shadow. Closer now. I didn't look. Didn't want to confirm it. I was trapped between them. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to breathe slowly, think clearly. This was a psychological effect. Exhaustion, stress, isolation. The human mind creates patterns, especially in low light conditions. I was seeing things that weren't there. But the shadows didn't feel like hallucinations. They felt like something watching, waiting. I checked my watch. 2:47 p.m. The storm should be easing soon. Another hour, maybe two. I just needed to stay calm, stay awake, keep the headlamp on. I sat back down against the wall, headlamp blazing, and forced myself to eat another protein bar. My hands were steady enough. My breathing was controlled. I was fine. I was fine. The battery indicator on my headlamp showed 70%. I had spare batteries in my pack, 4 AA's, enough for maybe 12 hours of continuous use if I was conservative. The storm wouldn't last that long. I kept the light on and watched the entrance. 3 p.m. came and went. The wind was still howling, but it seemed slightly less intense. The worst might be passing. My eyes were so heavy. I'd been awake for 10 hours, hiked hard, burned through adrenaline twice. The tube was cool and dark and quiet except for the wind. My body wanted sleep. I let my eyes close. Just for a second. When I opened them, my headlamp was off. I didn't remember turning it off. Both shadows were closer. The one at the entrance had moved inside the tube, standing maybe 10 feet from me. The one behind had circled around. I could see it on the opposite wall now, also 10 feet away. They'd formed a perimeter. I clicked the headlamp on with shaking hands. Nothing. Empty tube. Storm still raging outside, but lighter now. I could see more detail in the brown chaos. Headlamp off. The shadows stood exactly where they'd been, equidistant, forming a triangle with me at the center. And now I could see details. The one nearest the entrance was tall, impossibly thin, with arms too long for its body. The one on the opposite wall had the wrong proportions, legs bent backward at the knee, head tilted at an angle that shouldn't support a neck. They didn't move. When I looked at them, didn't breathe, didn't shift. They just waited. My watch read 4:18 p.m. The storm was definitely weakening. I could see shapes outside now, rock formations, the slope of the crater. Another 30 minutes, and I could make a run for it. I just had to stay awake. I kept the headlamp on, drank more water, stood up and paced a small circle, forcing blood to my legs, slapped my face lightly, did everything I could to fight the exhaustion. But I'd been awake for 11 hours. I'd burned every reserve. My body was shutting down whether I wanted it to or not. I sat back down, headlamp on, watching the entrance. My eyes closed. This time when I woke, I was in complete darkness. My headlamp was dead. Panic hit me like ice water. I fumbled for my pack, hands shaking, found the spare batteries. Dropped one. Heard it skitter across the basalt floor into the darkness. 3 batteries left. I got the headlamp open, fingers clumsy, jammed in new batteries, clicked it on. The beam flickered. Weak. The batteries were old. I should have replaced them before the trip. The light barely reached 15 feet. And in that 15 feet, I saw them. Not shadows anymore. Figures. 3 of them now. Standing in a loose circle around me. Perfectly still. They were gray. The color of ash. Skin stretched tight over frames that weren't quite human. Too tall. Joints in the wrong places. Hands with too many fingers. Heads topped with antlers, not deer antlers. Something else. Something that branched at impossible angles. Their eyes were black pits. Empty. Watching. I swept the headlamp beam across all 3. They didn't react to the light. Didn't move. Didn't blink. One stood at the entrance, blocking my exit. One stood deeper in the tube, blocking retreat. One stood to my left, closing the circle. My headlamp flickered. Once. Twice. The beam went orange, dying. The figures took a step closer. 4 feet away now, close enough that I could see details I didn't want to see. Their skin wasn't skin. It was something else, gray and papery, stretched too tight over bones that were the wrong shape. Their fingers were long, segmented in too many places, ending in points that looked more like thorns than nails. The antlers on their heads weren't symmetrical. They branched at angles that made my eyes hurt to follow, twisting back on themselves in impossible geometries. And their faces. God, their faces. The one blocking the entrance had a deer skull, bleached white, eye sockets empty, but somehow still watching. But the jaw moved. Not like a hinge, like it was tasting the air, savoring something. The one to my left had no face at all. Just smooth, gray surface where features should be, but I could feel it looking at me, studying me. The one deeper in the tube had too many eyes, small black pits scattered across what should have been a forehead, all focused on me with perfect attention. I pressed myself back against the wall, emergency blanket crumpling around me. There was nowhere to go. The tube stretched 60 feet behind me, but that was their territory. I could feel it. The entrance was 30 feet away, but the deer skull thing stood between me and escape. My headlamp flickered again. The figures shifted. Not steps. Something else. They were closer without having moved. 5 feet became 4, became 3. The light dimmed further. I could hear them now. Not footsteps, not breathing. Something else. A sound like wind through hollow trees, like dry leaves dragging across stone, like the whisper of something very old, remembering how to move. The headlamp went out. Complete darkness. For one heartbeat, 2, 3, I sat in absolute blackness, unable to see anything, unable to move, unable to think past the primal terror flooding my system. Then I heard movement. That dry leaf sound, but closer. All around me. Multiple sources. They were moving in the dark, circling, approaching. Something touched my left shoulder. The contact was wrong. Too cold. Too many points of pressure. Fingers that were too long, had too many joints, gripping with slow, deliberate force. Then my right shoulder. Another hand. Same wrongness. Same cold. The grip tightened. Slow and steady, like a hydraulic press engaging. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My throat had locked shut. A third hand settled on top of my head. This one had 7 fingers. I could count them by the pressure points against my scalp. They pressed down, forcing my neck to bend. The pressure increased. Slowly, patiently. They were in no hurry. My neck started to bend further. Vertebrae popped. The hands on my shoulders were pulling downward while the hand on my head pushed. They were going to fold me in half. Slowly, carefully, taking their time. I tried to breathe and couldn't. The pressure on my head had compressed my airways. Black spots bloomed in my vision, not that I could see anything in the darkness anyway. This was it. This was how I died. Not in a car crash. Not from a fall. Not from dehydration or hypothermia. Pulled apart in the dark by things that had been waiting in this tube since before humans learned to make fire. Things that knew patience in a way we never could. Things that had learned exactly how long human light lasts and how to wait for the moment it fails. The pressure on my head increased. My neck bent further. Something in my spine cracked. And then light, not my headlamp. Something else. Pale gold spilling through the tube entrance. Dawn. The first rays of sunlight spread across the basalt floor like liquid, advancing toward me in a slow, inexorable wave. The hands vanished. All 3 of them, simultaneously. The pressure released so suddenly I fell forward, caught myself on my hands and knees. My headlamp swung from its strap, dead weight, against my forehead. I gasped, sucked in air, my throat raw and burning. Stars danced in my vision. My neck screamed with pain. I looked up. The figures were retreating. They moved backward, deeper into the tube, step by step, staying ahead of the advancing sunlight. They didn't run, didn't hurry, didn't show any sign of panic or fear. They just withdrew with the same predatory patience they'd shown all night, as if this was simply how it worked. Light comes, they leave. Dark returns, they come back. The cycle had repeated for 79,000 years. Would continue for 79,000 more. I was just another animal that had sheltered in their territory. Another temporary presence. Another source of brief entertainment. The one with the deer skull face paused at the edge of the light, maybe 40 feet back now. The sunlight was spreading faster, flooding the tube entrance, driving the shadows deeper. It stood there for a long moment, watching me with those empty eye sockets. Then it turned and walked deeper into the darkness, following the others, unhurried, certain it would wait here, patient as stone, until the next time something sought shelter in the dark. I heard their footsteps receding. That dry leaf sound getting fainter. Fainter! The tube fell silent except for my own ragged breathing. I stayed on my hands and knees, shaking violently, until the sun fully cleared the horizon and the tube entrance was flooded with morning light, golden, warm, real. Then I grabbed my pack and ran. My legs were stiff from sitting all night, cramped and weak. I stumbled out of the tube into blinding morning sunlight, squinting against the glare. The desert air hit me, warm, dry, clean. Real air, safe air. I didn't look back at the tube entrance. Didn't want to see if anything was watching from the darkness. I scrambled up the slope, boots slipping on loose cinders, using my hands to claw my way up. My magnetometer case was still somewhere in the tube. I didn't care. I wasn't going back for it. The crater rim, the trail, the descent to the parking area. I ran the whole way, 3 miles of broken terrain, lungs burning, legs screaming. Every shadow made me flinch. Every dark opening in the rocks made my heart spike. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, fumbled the keys, dropped them in the dust, picked them up with shaking hands, got the door open, threw myself inside, locked it immediately, started the engine with the third try. My hands were bruised, deep purple fingerprints on both shoulders, perfectly clear even through my shirt. 5 fingers on the left, 6 on the right. I pulled down the rearview mirror. 7 finger-shaped bruises on top of my head, visible through my hair in a perfect circle. The bruises were already darkening to black. I drove to Barstow. Didn't stop. Didn't look back. Kept the windows up and the doors locked. Made it to the hospital by 9:30 a.m. At the hospital, I told them I'd fallen, got caught in the storm, banged up in the lava tube trying to wait it out. They cleaned the cuts on my hands, gave me a tetanus shot, told me to rest. I filed a report with the BLM office 2 days later, after the bruises had faded enough that I could wear a shirt without wincing. Routine incident report. Got caught in sandstorm, sheltered in lava tube, sustained minor injuries from falling in the dark. The ranger who took my statement was a woman named Miss Patterson. Late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, calm eyes that had seen things. She listened without comment, made notes in neat handwriting. Then she asked, "Which tube?" I told her. North Slope, 200 feet down from the rim, about 60 feet deep, before it curves. She set down her pen and looked at me for a long moment. "We've had 3 other incidents there," she said finally. "Last one was 18 months ago. Hiker took shelter during a storm. Stayed 4 days before we found him. Dehydrated, incoherent. Kept talking about shadows, said they had too many fingers. My blood went cold. What happened to him? Psychiatric hold. 6 weeks at a facility in San Bernardino. He got better eventually. Doesn't remember most of it now. His therapist said it was trauma-induced psychosis from the dehydration and isolation." She paused. "The one before that was 3 years ago. Woman, early 20s, sheltered overnight. Made it out at dawn. Never filed a formal report, but she told the volunteer ranger about shadows that moved wrong. We wrote it up as heat exhaustion." "And the first one?" 2019. Solo hiker, male. Never made it out. Search and rescue found his pack and equipment 30 feet into the tube, but no body. Just his gear and a lot of," she hesitated, "a lot of scratches on the walls like he'd been clawing at the rock." I looked at my hands. The cuts were healed now, but I remembered making them. Remembered pressing back against that wall while the shadows closed in. "You seem pretty coherent," Miss Patterson said, watching me carefully. "Most people who spend time in that tube come out different, confused, lost, You're processing this like someone who understands what happened to them. I got out at dawn. First light. She nodded slowly. Smart. The others all tried to leave in the dark, or gave up their light source trying to conserve batteries. She made another note. We're marking that tube as unstable, posting signs, putting up barriers if we can get the funding. No one else should shelter there. It's not unstable. No, she agreed quietly. But we can't exactly put up a sign that says what's really wrong with it. She stamped my report, filed it, and walked me to the door. Before I left, she said, "You got out because you kept your light going as long as you could. Most people panic, use up their batteries in the first hour. After that," she shrugged, "after that, it's just a question of how long they last in the dark." How long do they usually last? Depends on how patient the shadows are. In your case, I'd say you had about 30 seconds left when the sun came up. I never went back to Amboy Crater. The university finished the magnetic survey with a different geologist. I requested reassignment to Nevada sites only. No more volcanic fields, no more lava tubes, no more Mojave. But here's what I learned, and here's what I'll tell anyone who works remote desert sites. If you shelter in the dark, never let your light source die completely. Not your headlamp, not your flashlight, not your lantern. Keep spare batteries, fresh ones. Check them before every trip. Because there are things in the deep places that have learned to wait. They're patient. They've been there longer than we have. They know the dark better than we ever will. And they know exactly how long it takes for human light to fail. Story 2. The Kelso Dunes Camp. The shadow cast by my campfire wasn't moving with the flames. It was crouching, waiting for me to look away. I'm a landscape photographer, 35 years old. I've spent the last decade chasing perfect light across the American West Utah slot canyons, Wyoming Badlands, Oregon coast, California deserts. I know how to camp alone, know how to read weather, navigate by stars, ration water, know the difference between wildlife moving through camp and something else. What happened at Kelso Dunes wasn't wildlife. October 7th, 2023. I drove into Mojave National Preserve for a 3-day solo photography trip targeting the dunes at different times of day. Kelso Dunes are the third tallest in North America, rising 650 feet from the desert floor. Pale gold sand that sings when conditions are right. I'd been there twice before for day shoots. Never overnight. The plan was simple. Base camp at the dune field's eastern edge. Sunrise shoot on day 1. Midday texture work on day 2. Sunset and astro on day 3. 72 hours of solitude and perfect light. I should have noticed the warning signs earlier. I arrived at the Kelso Dunes Road trailhead around 2 p.m. on October 7th. Temperature in the low 80s, clear sky, light breeze from the west. Perfect conditions. The dunes rose in the distance like frozen waves, that distinctive pale color that catches light like nothing else. I loaded my pack camera gear, tripod, 3-gallon water bladder, dehydrated meals, sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, tent, headlamp, first aid kit, satellite communicator, standard 3-day kit. I'd done this dozens of times. The hike to my chosen camp spot was 2.3 miles across, relatively flat desert, then up into the dune field itself. I wanted to camp at the base of the tallest dune, where the sand meets the creosote scrub. Good access to the summit for sunrise, shelter from wind, proximity to established trails. I started hiking at 2:30 p.m. The trail was well marked, mostly hard-packed sand and gravel. Creosote bushes lined the path, their resinous smell sharp in the afternoon heat. A raven called from somewhere ahead, then went silent. By 4 p.m. I had reached the dune field proper. The terrain changed dramatically from desert scrub to pure sand, massive rippled dunes stretching north and south. The sand was almost white in the afternoon sun, blindingly bright. I found my camp spot at the base of the main dune around 4:45. A small flat area where sand met scattered vegetation, maybe 30 feet across. Perfect. far enough from the trail that I'd have privacy, close enough that I could find my way back in the dark if needed. The spot had everything I wanted: clear view to the east for sunrise, unobstructed west for sunset, decent wind protection from the dune itself. I could work here for 3 days easily. I set up camp methodically, the way I always do. Tent first, a lightweight two-person model I'd used for 5 years. Stakes driven deep into sand at 45-degree angles for maximum hold. Sleeping bag inside, rated to 20 degrees, more than enough for October nights. Gear organized by category: camera equipment in waterproof bags on one side, clothing and personal items on the other. Water bladder secured in shade under a mylar sheet. Food bag hanging from a makeshift pole I'd fashioned from a dead creosote branch, elevated to keep anything curious away from my supplies. By 5:30 I had camp established and was doing my initial scout of compositions for the evening shoot. The light was already transitioning toward golden hour. Long shadows stretching across the dunes, every ripple and ridge sharply defined, that magical quality where sand seems to glow from within. This was why I'd come. This exact light. I worked systematically, moving around the perimeter of camp in widening circles, mentally marking composition angles, checking sun positions, planning my shots. My camera stayed in the bag for now. I was just scouting, building a mental map of possibilities. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were in the sand, maybe 50 feet from my tent, forming an arc that curved around my camp. Boot prints, clearly defined, looked like hiking boots with aggressive tread. Fresh enough that the edges were still crisp, not yet softened by wind. Another hiker, obviously. Someone had passed by while I was setting up camp, seen my tent circled wide to avoid disturbing me. Standard trail etiquette. Respectful. Except I hadn't seen anyone. And out here, visibility was unlimited. You could see for miles in every direction across the flat desert surrounding the dunes. If someone had walked past in the last hour, I would have seen them. Should have seen them. I followed the prints, walking the arc. They curved around my camp in a smooth, consistent curve. I kept following. The arc continued, becoming a complete circle, maintaining a radius of roughly 50 feet from my tent. And then the prints just stopped, right where they'd started. The circle was complete and unbroken. No prints leading away into the desert. No prints coming in from the trail. Just a perfect circle around my camp, appearing and ending at the same point. I stood there staring at the sand, running through logical explanations. Wind had erased the approach and departure tracks, except there was barely any wind. The air was almost still, the kind of dead calm you get in late afternoon desert. And the circle prints themselves were perfectly intact, which meant wind couldn't have selectively erased only the approach tracks. These were old prints, days old, and I was just now noticing them, except they were fresh, completely fresh. I could see individual lug patterns in the tread, sharp grain displacement around the edges. These were made within the last few hours. I was misreading the pattern somehow. There had to be connecting tracks I was missing. I walked the entire circle again, slowly, checking every inch of sand. No connecting tracks, just the circle. I checked my satellite communicator. Full signal, 3 bars, battery at 82%. I could call for help if I needed to. But help for what? Strange footprints? That barely qualified as an issue. More like a curiosity, an oddity. I went back to my photography work, pushing the footprints out of my mind. Probably just some quirk of sand deposition I didn't understand. The desert does strange things, creates optical illusions, patterns that seem significant but aren't. I caught the sunset's spectacular work, exactly what I'd hoped for. Deep reds and purples bleeding across the western sky, the dunes lit like they were on fire, every ridge glowing. I burned through a full battery, shot after shot, compositions I'd been planning for months. By 7:15 it was full dark, temperature dropping fast the way desert nights do, from low 70s to low 50s in the span of an hour. I changed into my insulated layer, pulled on a fleece beanie, got my camp stove out to heat water for dinner. That's when I decided to build a fire. Technically, you're not supposed to have open fires in the preserve, leave no trace principles, fire danger, all the standard regulations. But I'd brought a small fire pan specifically for this, a collapsible metal tray 12 inches across that keeps flames completely off the ground, leaves no char marks, no trace. And I had dead wood I'd collected from the creosote scrub below the dunes during my hike in dry branches, already dead, enough for maybe 2 hours of small fire. I wasn't planning to burn all night, just wanted light while I ate, something warm and human in all this empty darkness. I set up the fire pan 20 feet from my tent on a flat patch of sand, arranged the wood carefully tinder first, then small twigs, then finger-thick branches in a loose pyramid. Got it lit with 3 strikes of my lighter. The flames caught immediately, crackling and spitting sparks. Within minutes I had a good fire going, orange flames dancing, maybe a foot high, casting warm, flickering light across the sand. The firelight pushed back the darkness in a rough circle, maybe 30 feet across, creating a bubble of warm illumination. Beyond that perimeter, the night was absolute no moon yet, just stars beginning to show in the darkening sky. I sat cross-legged on my sleeping pad next to the fire, opened my dehydrated chili, added hot water from my stove, stirred and waited for it to rehydrate. The familiar ritual was comforting. This was what camping was supposed to be. Fire, food, silence, stars. I was eating, watching the flames dance. When I saw it, at the very edge of the firelight, maybe 25 feet from the flames, there was a shadow. Not my shadow. Wrong direction entirely. I was sitting on the south side of the fire, blocking firelight with my body, casting my shadow northward away from the flames. But this shadow was on the north side of the fire, beyond the flames, at the edge where orange light faded into darkness. It was human-shaped, roughly, 6 feet tall, standing upright, arms at its sides, just standing there. I stopped eating, spoon halfway to my mouth, and stared at it. The fire crackled and popped. Flames danced wildly, sending light flickering in all directions, creating a constantly shifting pattern of illumination and shadow across the sand. But this shadow didn't move. Not the way shadows should. Fire shadows are never still, they're alive, constantly shifting, changing size and shape, dancing with every gust of wind, every flicker of flame. That's the nature of firelight. Chaotic, dynamic, always in motion. This shadow stood perfectly still, rigid, like it was cast by something solid and unchanging, something that didn't flicker or dance or respond to the flames at all. I set down my food slowly and stared at it for a full 30 seconds, trying to understand what I was seeing. Maybe it was a rock formation I hadn't noticed during setup, some outcrop catching light at a weird angle. I turned around, looking back past my tent into the darkness beyond. Nothing. Just open sand stretching into blackness. No rocks, no formations, no creosote bushes close enough to cast that kind of shadow. I looked back at the shadow. Still there. Still motionless. Still human-shaped. I stood up slowly, brushing sand off my pants. Walked around the fire to get a better angle, to see what might be casting this impossible shadow. The shadow shifted. Not following me. Not turning with me. It repositioned itself, moved to a different spot at the edge of the firelight, maintaining that same 25-foot distance from the flames, like it was adjusting to stay in my peripheral vision, to stay at the boundary. My heart rate kicked up, that primal response to seeing something that violates the rules of how reality works. I grabbed my headlamp from my pocket, clicked it on, aimed the bright LED beam at where the shadow appeared to originate. Nothing. Just sand. Empty darkness beyond the reach of my headlamp. I swept the beam left and right, searching for any object, any irregularity that could explain what I was seeing. Nothing. I turned off the headlamp. The shadow reappeared immediately. Same spot, same stillness, same human shape. I fed more wood to the fire, building it up, making the flames higher and brighter. The light pushed further into the darkness, expanding the illuminated circle from 30 feet to maybe 35. The shadow retreated, stayed at the exact edge of the new firelight perimeter, maintaining that precise distance where light fades to black. I checked my watch. 8:37 p.m. I tried to think through this logically, the way I approach any problem. I'm a photographer. I understand light. I know how it behaves, how it interacts with surfaces, how shadows are created. Shadows require three things: a light source, an object to block the light, and a surface for the shadow to fall on. I had the light source, my fire. I had the surface, the sand. But I had no object, nothing between the fire and the shadow that could be blocking light, unless the object was invisible, or beyond the reach of the firelight, or something my eyes couldn't properly process. I finished my dinner mechanically, not really tasting it, watching the shadow the whole time. It remained at the edge of the firelight, perfectly still, while the flames danced and shifted. This was an optical illusion, some trick of exhaustion and firelight and the human brain's tendency to find patterns in randomness. I'd been up since 5 a.m., driven 6 hours, hiked 3 miles with 40 pounds on my back, worked through a full sunset shoot. Tired eyes see things that aren't there. Except this didn't feel like pareidolia or hallucination. This felt deliberate, positioned, aware. I cleaned my pot with sand, hung my food bag from its pole, did all my normal camp chores. The shadow watched the entire time, maintaining its position at the firelight's edge. By 10 p.m. I was fighting sleep hard. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, orange and red, barely producing light anymore. The shadow had moved closer now, maybe 20 feet from the coals, right at the edge where dim orange glow faded to complete darkness. I added more wood. The flames jumped back to life, bright and crackling. The shadow retreated to its 25-foot perimeter. I was seeing a clear pattern now. The shadow existed at the boundary between light and dark. When the light grew, it retreated. When the light dimmed, it advanced, never crossing fully into the light, never disappearing completely into the dark, always right there at the edge, patient, waiting. Waiting for what? For the fire to die completely, for the light to fail, for darkness to reclaim its territory. I didn't want to find out what happened then. I kept the fire burning until midnight, feeding it constantly, refusing to let it dim. My woodpile was running low. I'd brought enough for maybe 2 hours of fire. I'd been burning for nearly 4. Around 12:30 a.m., I climbed into my tent, zipped it shut, left the fire burning outside. I could see the glow through the tent fabric, orange light filtering through nylon, creating its own shadows inside my tent. And there, on the tent wall opposite me, was a shadow. Not mine. Wrong position, wrong shape. It looked like it was crouching, just outside the tent, pressed against the fabric. I grabbed my headlamp, aimed it at the tent wall. The shadow vanished. Headlamp off. It returned, crouching, still, like a figure kneeling outside my tent, face pressed to the nylon. I turned the headlamp back on and kept it on, pointed at the ceiling. Weak blue-white LED light flooding the tent interior. No more shadow, just normal tent fabric, faintly glowing orange from the dying fire outside. I lay there, headlamp blazing, listening to my own heartbeat. Outside, the fire crackled once, twice, then went quiet. The orange glow through the tent walls faded. Darkness settled. I didn't sleep. Dawn came at 6:23 a.m. I hadn't slept at all. Just lay there all night, headlamp on at maximum brightness, watching the tent walls for shadows that shouldn't exist, listening to sounds that might not be wind. When the first gray light started filtering through the tent fabric, I finally felt safe enough to turn off the headlamp and check the batteries, down to 40% from a full charge. I'd burned through 60% of power in one night. I had spares, 4 AA's in my pack, but I couldn't sustain this burn rate. 2 more nights like this, and I'd be out of light entirely. I unzipped the tent slowly, half expecting to see something waiting outside. Nothing. Just cold morning air, clean and sharp. The dunes glowing pale gold in early light. The fire completely dead, just white ash in the fire pan, not even coals remaining. Around the fire pan, the sand was smooth and undisturbed, wind rippled, normal, except for the footprints, a new circle, closer than yesterday's 50-foot perimeter. This one was maybe 30 feet from my tent, running in a perfect arc around my camp. Same pattern, complete circle, no tracks leading in, no tracks leading out, and the prints were different. I walked over to examine them, moving slowly, documenting everything with my eyes, crouched down next to the clearest print, studied the tread pattern. They matched mine. Exactly. Same boot size men's, size 11. Same tread pattern, Salomon X Ultra 3 GTX. Same wear marks where my gait puts pressure on the outside heel and inside ball of foot. Like I had gotten up in the night, walked a perfect circle around my own camp at exactly 30 feet distance, then returned to my tent without leaving approach or departure tracks. Except I'd been in my tent all night. Hadn't moved. Hadn't even unzipped the door. I pulled off my right boot, turned it over, compared the tread to the prints in the sand. Perfect match. Every detail, every wear pattern, like the sand had been stamped with a mold of my exact boot. I put my boot back on and stood up slowly, scanning the horizon in all directions. The dunes stretched empty and pristine, unmarked except for wind ripples and my immediate camp area. No movement. No sound except the whisper of morning breeze starting to build. This wasn't right. None of this was right. But I had a job to do. I'd planned this shoot for months, coordinated time off, drove 6 hours, invested money in permits and gear. I had specific compositions mapped out, sunrise angles I had calculated weeks ago using sun position apps and topographic maps. I could leave, pack up right now, hike out, abandon the trip with 1 day of work complete. Or I could stay, get my shots, 1 more night, and I'd be done anyway. 72 hours total. I was already 2/3 through. I chose to stay. The decision wasn't logical. Looking back, I know that. But in the moment, exhausted and rattled and trying to maintain some semblance of control, completing the project felt like the only thing that made sense. If I ran, whatever was happening won, and I'd have nothing to show for it. If I stayed and finished, I'd at least have the work. Professional pride, stubbornness, denial, all of it together. I spent the morning hiking the dunes, forcing myself to focus on photography. The light was exceptional, crisp morning clarity, long shadows across sand, that blue hour quality that makes every detail sharp. I worked methodically, setting up compositions I'd previewed yesterday, adjusting for the actual light conditions, shooting multiple exposures for each setup. Lost myself in the technical work. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO, composition, focus. The familiar rhythm helped, made things feel normal. By noon, I had some of the best dune photography I had ever produced. Images that would go straight into my portfolio, probably win competitions. Worth the trip, I told myself. Worth staying. I returned to camp around 1 p.m., heated water for lunch, ate a dehydrated meal without tasting it, reviewed my morning's work on the camera's LCD screen. Solid compositions, excellent light, professional-grade work. The footprint circle remained, baking in the midday sun. I tried not to look at it. I spent the afternoon doing texture work, close-up photography of sand patterns, wind-carved miniature landscapes, the way individual grains catch light. Technical macro work that requires intense focus and steady hands. My hands weren't steady. They were shaking slightly, that fine tremor that comes from exhaustion and adrenaline. I had to use faster shutter speeds to compensate, pushing ISO higher than I normally would. By 5 p.m., I was running on fumes. 36 hours without sleep. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, that soft focus haze that comes before full hallucination. My thoughts were sluggish, sticky, like thinking through mud. I needed sleep. Desperately. But sunset was approaching, and I had compositions planned. Golden hour is sacred. In landscape photography, you don't waste it. I worked through the sunset, capturing the dunes in rich amber light, every ridge glowing, shadows stretching long and dramatic. Burned through another full battery, shot after shot. Got work I'd be proud of, but I could barely appreciate it. My hands were shaking harder now. My eyes kept trying to close on their own. By 7:30 it was dark again, and I had to make a decision. I stood next to my tent, looking at what remained of my wood pile, maybe 6 or 7 pieces left. Enough for an hour of fire, maybe 90 minutes if I was conservative. Not enough for the whole night, not even close. I could skip the fire, go straight to bed, try to sleep, hope whatever was happening would leave me alone if I didn't provoke it with firelight, or I could build another fire, burn through my wood, and face the darkness afterward. I built the fire. Same setup as last night, fire pan, dead wood, lighter. The flames caught quickly, hungry and bright, pushing back the darkness. The shadow appeared within seconds. Closer this time, maybe 15 feet from the flames instead of 25, standing upright at the very edge of the firelight, perfectly still while the fire danced and crackled. I sat down hard on my sleeping pad, staring at it. Exhaustion made everything feel distant and unreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. The shadow stood there, patient and motionless, while I fed the fire. I kept the flames high, adding wood more frequently than I needed to, trying to maintain maximum light. The shadow maintained its 15-foot distance, never advancing, never retreating, just waiting. By 9 p.m. my woodpile was gone. The fire was burning down to coals, and I had nothing left to feed it. The shadow crept closer as the flames dimmed. 14 feet. 13. 12. I watched it approach. Completely helpless. The fire was dying, and I couldn't stop it. Physics and fuel supply don't care about human fear. At 10:15 p.m., the last flames flickered and died. Orange coals glowed weakly in the fire pan, casting almost no light, just a dim red glow, maybe 5 feet across. The shadow stood at the edge of that weak glow, maybe 8 feet from the fire pan now. Close enough that I could see it had dimension, texture, reality beyond a simple silhouette. It had shoulders, arms that hung too long, a head, and on top of the head, something spread wide, branches, antlers, points reaching up and out against the stars. I could see my breath, even though the temperature was only in the low 50s. The air had gone cold around me, that penetrating chill that has nothing to do with weather. I scrambled backward, grabbed my headlamp, clicked it on. Nothing there, just empty sand and darkness. Headlamp off. The figure stood exactly where it had been, 8 feet away, antlers spread against the stars. I ran to my tent, threw myself inside, zipped it shut, headlamp on, maximum brightness, aimed at the tent ceiling. The battery indicator showed 28%. I wasn't going to make it through the night. I lay there, headlamp blazing, listening, trying to hear movement outside. Footsteps, breathing, anything. Silence. Just whined across sand. Around 11 p.m. I heard something. Not footsteps, something else. A soft sound, like fabric dragging across sand, coming from multiple directions, circling the tent. I kept the headlamp on, watched the tent walls for shadows. They appeared around midnight. 3 of them, on 3 different sides of my tent, all crouching, all pressed against the fabric like they were leaning in. I aimed my headlamp at the nearest one. It vanished. I aimed at another. Gone. I swept the beam in a circle, chasing shadows that disappeared and reappeared, always just outside the beam's path. My headlamp flickered. Battery at 15%. I had spare batteries, 4 AA's in my pack, but changing them meant turning off the headlamp, meant darkness. The shadows pressed closer against the tent walls. I could see the fabric dimpling inward where they leaned, like someone pushing from outside. I had to change the batteries. Had to. I grabbed the spare pack, got the batteries ready. 3, 2, 1. I turned off the headlamp. Darkness. Complete. The tent walls rustled. All around me. Pressure from every side. I fumbled the battery compartment open, dropped the old batteries, jammed in new ones with shaking hands, clicked the power button. Nothing. Clicked again. Light. The shadows pulled back just slightly. Battery indicator showed 100%. I kept the light on and didn't move. Around 2 a.m. I started hallucinating. Had to be hallucinations. Sleep deprivation causes them after 48 hours of wakefulness. I was at 52. I saw the shadows moving through the tent walls, not just pressed against them, moving through them like the nylon wasn't there. Gray shapes with wrong proportions sliding into my tent, then retreating when the headlamp beam passed near them. I saw faces. Deer skulls with hollow eyes, human faces with too many features, things that shifted and changed when I tried to focus on them. I heard voices, whispers in a language I didn't know, breathing that matched my own rhythm, my name spoken in my own voice from outside the tent. Hallucinations, all of it, sleep deprivation and fear and isolation, but the tent fabric kept dimpling inward, and that was real. At 4:30 a.m. my headlamp died again. I changed batteries, down to my last set. At 5:15 the last battery started to fade. I was out of light, out of power, out of options. The shadows pressed against all sides of my tent now, fabric bowing inward, the walls getting closer. They were going to collapse the tent on top of me. Slowly, patiently. They had all the time in the world. I couldn't breathe. The tent felt like it was shrinking, air getting thinner. This was it. Third night. The pattern was complete. They'd circled at 50 feet, then 30 feet. Now they were right here, right on top of me. My headlamp flickered. Once, twice. The shadows leaned in further. I could feel them now, cold radiating through the tent fabric. The headlamp died. Pure darkness. The tent walls collapsed inward, fabric pressing against my face, my chest, my legs. Something grabbed my sleeping bag through the nylon, pulling it downward with impossible strength. I screamed, tried to scramble out of the bag, got tangled, couldn't move. Cold hands pressed through the tent fabric. I could feel fingers, too many of them, too long, wrong number of joints gripping my shoulders through the nylon. Then light. Not my headlamp. Something else. Dawn. The first rays of sunlight hit the tent, thin gray light filtering through the fabric. The hands vanished. The pressure released. The tent walls popped back to their normal shape. I lay there, gasping, tangled in my sleeping bag, covered in sweat despite the cold. Outside, the wind picked up. Morning wind, normal and natural. I waited until full sunrise, 6:31 a.m. before unzipping the tent. The morning was clear, cold, beautiful. The dunes glowed pale gold in early light. Around my tent, the sand showed a new circle of footprints, 10 feet away now. My boot treads, perfect circle. And inside that circle, I found something else, marks in the sand. Deep gouges, like something with claws, had scraped the ground. They radiated inward from the footprint circle, pointing toward my tent. All around the 10-foot perimeter, dozens of them, claw marks. Whatever had been circling my camp had been getting ready to come in. But dawn had stopped it. I packed up in 20 minutes, didn't bother with breakfast, didn't stop to organize gear properly, just shoved everything in my pack and started hiking. I didn't run, wouldn't let myself run, but I walked fast, steady, focused on the trail ahead. 2.3 miles back to the parking area. I made it in 45 minutes. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, covered in dust, windows intact, no signs of tampering. Normal, safe. I loaded my gear, locked the doors, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see the dunes rising in the distance. Pale gold, beautiful, deadly. I drove to Baker and got a motel room. Slept for 16 hours straight. When I woke up, I checked my photos. They were all there. 3 days of work. Some of my best images. But in the background of my sunset shots from night 2, I could see something, a figure. standing on a dune maybe 200 yards behind my camp, tall, antlers spreading wide against the darkening sky. It was in every sunset photo I'd taken that evening. Different positions, different dunes, but always there, always watching. I never went back to Kelso Dunes. Filed my photos with my stock agency. They sold well, award-winning work, according to the editor, but I never told anyone what happened out there. Until now. Here's what I learned. If you camp alone in the desert, watch your shadows carefully, especially fire shadows. They should dance and flicker and move with the flames. If you see a shadow that stands still while the fire moves, don't wait to see what it does. Don't try to explain it. Don't spend multiple nights watching it get closer. Break camp immediately. Hike out in darkness if you have to, because whatever creates those shadows understands patience better than we ever will. It knows exactly how long human light lasts, knows how exhaustion works, knows that on the third night you'll be weak enough, and by then it'll be close enough to reach you. Story 3. The Granite Pass Breakdown. At 11:43 p.m. on the third night, the shadow standing outside my truck finally knocked on the window. I'm a geologist, 38 years old. I've spent 15 years working remote desert sites across the Southwest, mineral surveys, groundwater assessments, environmental impact studies. I know how to handle vehicle breakdowns, know how to ration water, signal for help, survive in extreme conditions, know the difference between heat exhaustion and heat stroke, between dehydration stages, between rational fear and panic. What happened on Granite Pass Road wasn't any of those things. September 23, 2023. I was driving back from a 3-day mineral survey in the Granite Mountains, eastern Mojave Desert. Remote range, minimal traffic, backcountry roads that see maybe one vehicle per week, if that. I'd been mapping pegmatite dikes for rare earth elements study technical work, climbing around granite outcrops with a rock hammer and GPS unit, collecting samples. My truck was a 2019 Ford F-150, heavy duty, loaded with rock samples and plastic bins, survey equipment, camping gear, reliable vehicle. I'd put 40,000 miles on desert roads with zero issues. The breakdown happened at 2:17 p.m., roughly 18 miles from the nearest paved road. I was navigating Granite Pass Road, a 2-track mining access road, BLM maintained in theory but barely touched in practice. More rocks than dirt, washboard sections that rattle your teeth, dips and climbs that require 4-wheel drive, the kind of road that appears on maps but isn't really meant for through traffic. Just access for mining claims and the occasional geologist like me. I was climbing a moderate-grade engine, working but not straining, when I heard it, a change in the engine note. Slight roughness. Then the temperature alarm, a sharp beep that cut through the radio silence. I glanced at the dashboard. Temperature gauge climbing fast, from normal operating range to 3/4, then into the red zone. I pulled over immediately, killed the engine, threw it in park, grabbed my work gloves, popped the hood. Steam rose from the engine bay in a thick plume. I let it dissipate before leaning in to look. Coolant everywhere. Green fluid splashed across the engine block, dripping onto the ground, pooling in the dirt. The smell hit me, that distinctive sweet antifreeze smell mixed with hot metal. I traced the leak to the lower radiator hose. Split wide open along a 6-inch section, the rubber cracked and failed. Catastrophic failure. Must have been degrading for months without me noticing. Desert heat accelerates rubber deterioration and finally gave out under pressure. I had tools in my truck bed. Socket set, wrenches, screwdrivers, zip ties, duct tape, emergency repair supplies. I had spare fluids, motor oil, transmission fluid, even a spare belt. But I didn't have a spare radiator hose. That's not standard emergency equipment. You can't carry spares for every possible failure point. I could try rigging a temporary fix, wrap the split section in duct tape, zip tie it tight, hope it holds long enough to limp to pavement. But looking at the damage, I knew it wouldn't work. The split was too wide, the pressure too high. Any temporary fix would fail within minutes of starting the engine. I was stranded 18 miles from Highway 62, the nearest paved road. No way to drive out. I checked my phone. No signal. Hadn't had bars since I'd left the pavement that morning. Wouldn't get signal again until I was back in 29 Palms or Joshua Tree. That's normal for this area. Expected. The Granite Mountains are too remote, too low traffic to justify cell towers. But I'd planned for this. I pulled out my satellite communicator, a Garmin InReach Mini I carry for exactly these situations. Compact device, clips to my belt or pack, uses the Iridium satellite network for global coverage. I'd paid the subscription specifically for remote work scenarios. I turned it on, watched it search for satellites. Took about 90 seconds to acquire a fix. Then I typed out a message using the tiny interface. Vehicle breakdown, Granite Pass Road, approx mile marker 34. Coolant system failure, not drivable. Require tow truck. Non-emergency situation. Have adequate water and supplies for 48 hours. No medical issues. I hit send. The device confirmed transmission. Message sent successfully to my company's emergency contact, a dispatch service we contract with for field support. Response came back within 20 minutes. Message received and logged. Contacting roadside assistance services for your area. Estimated time of arrival for a tow truck approximately 24 to 36 hours due to remote location and limited service availability. Please confirm you have adequate water, food, and shelter. I typed back, confirmed. 5 gallons water, emergency supplies, sleeping bag, food for 1 week. Vehicle provides shelter. Will maintain regular contact. Another response. Acknowledged. Please check in every 12 hours. We'll update you on tow truck ETA as information becomes available. I set an alarm on my watch for 12 hours. Routine established. I was okay. This was manageable. I assessed my situation methodically, the way I'd been trained in my wilderness first responder course. I ran through the survival priorities: shelter, water, signaling, food, shelter, my truck, intact, lockable, provides shade and wind protection, good. Water, 5 gallons and 2 containers in the truck bed, more than adequate for several days even in extreme heat, good. Signaling, satellite communicator working, messages going through, good. Food, protein bars, trail mix, dried fruit, jerky, week's worth, easily, good. Medical, first aid kit fully stocked, no injuries, good. Weather, clear skies, no storms forecast. Temperature in the mid-90s, typical for late September in the Mojave, manageable. I was in good shape. This was inconvenient, not dangerous. I just had to wait. I moved my truck to optimize the situation. Backed it up 30 feet to park in the shade of a large rock outcrop on the north side of the road. The outcrop was maybe 20 feet tall, granite weathered into massive, rounded boulders, casting afternoon shade that would last until sunset. I shut off all electronics to conserve battery, radio off, AC off, everything except the hazard lights, which I left blinking for the unlikely possibility of passing traffic. Opened all 4 windows to create cross-ventilation. The outside temperature was 97 degrees, but with airflow and shade it was tolerable inside the cab. I pulled out my sleeping bag and laid it in the truck bed, rigged a tarp above it for additional shade using bungee cords and the truck's tie-downs, created a decent sleeping setup that would keep me out of direct sun. Then I settled in to wait. The first day was uneventful in the way desert waiting always is. Time moves differently when you're sitting still in heat. Minutes stretch, hours compress. The sun tracks across the sky with agonizing slowness. I spent the time in the truck cab, driver's seat reclined to a comfortable angle, reading a paperback western I'd brought Louis L'Amour, my guilty pleasure on field work. Sipped water at regular intervals, monitoring my intake. 16 ounces per hour in this heat, more if I was moving around. I had learned proper hydration protocols years ago. Dehydration is the #1 killer in desert emergencies, and it sneaks up on you. By the time you feel thirsty, you're already behind. I got out every hour to walk short distances, keeping blood circulating, preventing the stiffness that comes from sitting. Walked loops around the truck, stretched my legs and back. Checked the road in both directions, empty gravel and rock stretching to the horizon. No dust plumes indicating approaching vehicles. No sound except wind and the occasional call of a raven. The heat was oppressive, but manageable. Inside the shaded cab with windows open, the temperature held around 90. Outside in direct sun, it was closer to 100. I stayed in shade, conserved energy, stayed methodical. By 6 p.m. the temperature started its evening drop, the Mojave's signature temperature swing. Within an hour it would fall 20 degrees, then another 20 after sunset. I ate a protein bar and an apple from my small cooler, drank 16 more ounces of water. My hydration was on track. Urine was pale yellow, good sign. I stepped out of the truck to watch the sunset. This was prime time for desert photography if I'd had my camera set up. The light was extraordinary rich gold washing across the Granite mountains, every ridge and boulder catching fire, shadows stretching long and dramatic across the valley floor. The rock formations around my truck were spectacular in this light. Typical Mojave granite, massive weathered boulders, rounded by millennia of wind and temperature stress, stacked in improbable formations that looked like they should topple but had stood for thousands of years. The nearest large boulder was maybe 40 feet west of my truck, roughly the size of a small sedan, perched on smaller rocks in a precarious-looking arrangement. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, the boulder cast a long shadow stretching east toward my position. I watched it extend, that slow geometric progression of shadow following the sun's descent. That's when I noticed something wrong. The shadow didn't match the boulder. I stared at it, trying to reconcile what I was seeing. The boulder was round and squat, maybe 8 feet tall and 12 feet wide, a typical granite weathering shape, dome-like, eroded smooth, but its shadow was wrong. Too tall, too narrow. The shadow rose maybe 12 feet high, taller than the boulder itself, and was only 3 or 4 feet wide, almost human proportioned, vaguely humanoid, with something at the top that looked like a head with projections rising from it. I walked around to the east side of my truck to get a clearer view, trying to make sense of the geometry. Light source was clear, setting sun, low on the western horizon, approximately 15 degrees above the horizon now. Object was clear, the granite boulder, solid and unchanging. Surface the shadow fell on was clear, flat desert floor, gravel and sand. But the shadow didn't make geometric sense. I approached the boulder directly, walking across the 40 feet of desert between my truck and the rock formation. As I got closer, the shadow's shape should have changed from my new perspective, should have foreshortened, warped, transformed based on my viewing angle. It didn't. It maintained that same upright humanoid shape. I reached the boulder, put my hand on sun-warmed granite. The rock was solid, real, massive. Temperature stored in the stone radiated against my palm. The shadow stretched away from the boulder, extending east maybe 60 feet across the desert floor. And at the very tip of that shadow, farthest from its supposed source, I could see details that made my skin crawl. What looked like fingers. 5 of them, long and thin, splayed across the sand. I knelt down next to the shadow's edge, studying it. The boundary between shadow and sunlight was sharp, crisp, well-defined, normal shadow behavior. But the shape was all wrong. I stood up, moved to different positions around the boulder, trying to find an angle where the shadow made sense. It didn't. From every angle, it looked like the shadow of a tall figure with arms and a head, not a rounded granite boulder. I checked the sky again. The sun was maybe 10 degrees above the horizon now, orange and huge. Light angle was straightforward. There were no other light sources, no reflected light from other rocks that could create secondary shadows. This shadow was impossible. I stood there, hand on the sun-warmed granite, staring at a shadow that violated basic principles of physics and geometry. Then the sun dropped below the horizon, that final plunge that happens fast in the desert. Twilight lasted maybe 15 minutes, golden light fading to purple, then deep blue, then black. The stars emerged, brilliant and sharp in the dry air. All the shadows disappeared into general darkness. I walked back to my truck using my headlamp, that familiar weight on my head, LED beam cutting through the night. Told myself it was an optical illusion, some quirk of light angle I didn't fully understand. The desert creates visual anomalies, mirages from heat distortion, atmospheric lensing effects, strange refraction patterns. I'd seen plenty of weird phenomena in 15 years of field work. This was just another one, nothing to worry about. I climbed into the truck bed, got into my sleeping bag. The temperature was dropping fast now, already down to 70, would hit the low 50s by midnight. I pulled the bag up to my shoulders, adjusted the tarp overhead to block wind, stared up at the Milky Way. The stars were extraordinary, no light pollution for 50 miles in any direction. The galactic core hung overhead like a river of light, individual stars too numerous to count. I picked out constellations Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, Orion rising in the east. Sleep came eventually. Not good sleep. The kind of fitful dozing you get when you're in an unfamiliar place, uncomfortable position, brain half alert for danger. I'd surface to consciousness every 30 or 40 minutes, check my surroundings, then drift back under. At 3:27 a.m., I woke fully to a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, soft but distinct. The crunch and slide sound of boots on desert gravel, steady rhythm, walking pace, not running, making a slow circuit around my truck. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, not moving, barely breathing. Listened. The footsteps were methodical. Crunch, slide, consistent spacing. Someone or something walking in a circle around my vehicle, maybe 30 or 40 feet out. My first thought was rational. Another stranded motorist. Someone else broke down, saw my truck, was checking to see if anyone was here. But that didn't make sense. If it was another person, they'd call out, make their presence known, ask if I needed help or had supplies to share. They wouldn't silently circle my truck in the middle of the night. My second thought was less rational but more probable. Animal. Coyote or bobcat, maybe a mountain lion, investigating the foreign object in their territory. Desert predators are curious, especially about vehicles, which can mean food scraps or water. But the footsteps didn't sound like animal paws. They sounded like boots. That distinctive two-part sound, heel strike, then toe off. The rhythm was too regular, too deliberate. The steps continued. One complete circuit around my truck, then another, then a third. I sat up slowly, minimizing noise, grabbed my headlamp from where I'd hung it on the truck's tie-down ring, clicked it on, aimed it in the direction of the footsteps. Nothing. I swept the beam in a full circle. Empty desert. Rock formations standing dark and still. No movement. No animals. No people. The footsteps had stopped the moment my light came on. I kept the headlamp on, scanning continuously. My heartbeat was elevated but not panicked. I was alert, focused, running through logical explanations. Sound carries strangely in the desert at night. Temperature inversions create acoustic effects. What I'd heard could have been rocks settling as they cooled, thermal contraction creating small movements that sounded like footsteps. Or it could have been my imagination, dream state audio hallucinations bleeding into waking consciousness. I'd been asleep, or mostly asleep. The brain creates phantom sounds during sleep transitions. I kept the light on for 5 full minutes, sweeping the perimeter. Nothing moved. Nothing made sound, except the soft whisper of wind across sand. Finally, I turned off the headlamp and lay back down. Silence. Just wind. Natural desert night sounds. I told myself it was nothing. Closed my eyes. Didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just lay there, listening, waiting for dawn. Dawn came at 6:41 a.m., that slow brightening of the eastern sky from black to deep blue to pale gold. I climbed out of the truck bed stiff and exhausted, every muscle protesting. I'd been awake most of the night, tense and alert, burning energy I didn't have to spare. I drank water first thing, 16 ounces, the morning ration, then ate a protein bar mechanically, not tasting it. I needed calories and hydration. Everything else was secondary. I checked my satellite communicator. No new messages. The tow truck was still en route. ETA sometime today. I sent my 12-hour check-in. Day 2. Status good. Water and supplies adequate, no issues. That last part was a lie, but what was I going to say? Heard phantom footsteps, saw impossible shadows. They'd think I was having a heat stroke or mental breakdown. Would potentially trigger an expensive helicopter evacuation for what might be nothing. I walked around the perimeter of my truck, checking the ground. Footprints. They were clear in the sand and gravel boot prints forming a wide circle around my truck, maybe 30 feet out. Complete circle, unbroken. The prints showed good detail. Tread pattern, heel strike, toe off, fresh, made within the last few hours judging by the crisp edges. I walked the full circle slowly, studying the tracks. They were consistent in depth and spacing, like someone had walked at a steady pace, maintaining an exact radius from my truck. And they looked exactly like my boots. I sat down on the truck's tailgate and pulled off my right boot, turned it over, examined the tread. Salomon hiking boots, men's size 11, worn for 2 years. The tread pattern was distinctive, aggressive lugs in a specific geometric pattern, with wear marks where my gait put the most pressure. I walked over to the clearest print and compared my boot directly. Perfect match. Every detail, every wear mark, like the sand, had been stamped with a mold of my exact boot. I put my boot back on slowly, thinking through this. I'd been in the truck bed all night. The truck bed was 6 feet off the ground when you counted the suspension and bed height. I hadn't climbed down, hadn't walked anywhere. Yet here were my boot prints, fresh, circling my truck. Sleepwalking was the obvious explanation. Except I'd never sleepwalked in my life. And sleepwalking doesn't explain perfect geometric circles. Doesn't explain the complete absence of prints leading to or from the circle. I stood up and forced myself to focus on immediate priorities. Shelter, water, signaling, food. The footprints were anomalous, but not dangerous. They weren't a survival threat. I had bigger concerns, like the heat. Day 2 was worse than day 1. Temperature climbed fast after sunrise, 70 by 7 a.m., 80 by 8, 90 by 9. By noon, it had hit 103 degrees. Heat radiated off the ground in visible waves. The air felt solid, thick, hard to breathe. I stayed in the shade of my tarp, minimizing movement, breathing slowly through my nose to reduce moisture loss. Drank water on schedule 16 ounces per hour, watching my supply decrease. I'd consumed a gallon on day 1. Had 4 gallons left for however many days this took. The math was getting concerning. If the tow truck took another full day, 48 hours total, I'd go through another 2 gallons minimum. That left 2 gallons for contingency. Adequate, but not comfortable. I checked my satellite communicator every hour. No updates. The tow truck was still delayed permit issues for the mining roads, some bureaucratic paperwork problem. New ETA, possibly tonight, more likely tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. That would be 72 hours total. 3 days. I sent back. Confirmed. Water supply adequate for extended wait. No urgent extraction needed. That was optimistic. But still true, technically. The heat made me drowsy. That dangerous desert drowsiness where your body wants to shut down, conserve energy, wait out the worst of the temperature. I'd fight sleep, then close my eyes for just a moment, then jerk awake minutes later with no memory of dozing off. Microsleep. The first warning sign of heat exhaustion, your body trying to protect itself by forcing rest. I monitored my symptoms clinically. Headache, mild, manageable. Dizziness when standing, slight. Urine color, darker than this morning. Yellow amber instead of pale. Heart rate, elevated, probably mid-80s resting. All early-stage dehydration indicators, but nothing critical yet. I increased my water intake slightly, 20 ounces per hour instead of 16. Small adjustment that would help. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Time had stopped meaning anything. The sun crawled across the sky with geological slowness. I read the same page of my book 4 times without comprehending the words. Around 4 p.m., the temperature finally peaked and started its evening decline, 106 degrees. The hottest day of my breakdown so far. I'd gone through another gallon of water. 3 left. Sunset came at 6:48 p.m. I forced myself to get out of the truck cab, move around, work the stiffness out of my joints. Ate trail mix and jerky, drank more water, watched the light change. The shadows appeared as the sun touched the horizon. This time there were 3 of them. 3 large boulders in my vicinity, 3 shadows stretching east across the desert floor, and all 3 shadows were wrong. Too tall, too narrow, too human-shaped. I watched them closely as the sun descended. Normally shadows stretch and distort as the light angle changes. They elongate, compress, transform based on the sun's position. These shadows didn't follow those rules. They maintained consistent shapes regardless of light angle. Upright figures, roughly human proportions, with something rising from the head area. Antlers, that's what they look like. Branching projections spreading wide. As I watched, the shadows moved, not with the sun's descent. The sun was barely moving now, merely touching the horizon, almost stationary, but the shadows shifted independently, small movements, standing straighter, adjusting positions, getting closer to my truck. I grabbed my headlamp, clicked it on, aimed it at the nearest shadow. The shadow vanished and the LED beam, just gone, like it had never existed. I swept the light to the second shadow, gone. Third shadow, gone. I turned off the headlamp. All 3 shadows reappeared instantly, and they were closer now, maybe 25 feet from my truck instead of the original 40. They had advanced while the light was on, while I wasn't looking directly at them. My heart rate spiked. This wasn't heat exhaustion, wasn't hallucination. These shadows were real, were present, were behaving with intention and awareness. I kept my headlamp on, swept it continuously in a circle around the truck, keeping light on everything, refusing to let darkness settle. The shadows stayed away. Just outside the headlamp beam's range, at the edge where light fades, I kept the light moving. For hours, long after sunset, into full darkness. My arm got tired holding the headlamp. I rigged it to my truck's side mirror, angled to sweep a wide arc. Let the beam rotate slowly, pushed by desert breeze moving the mirror. It worked. The shadows stayed at the perimeter, watching, waiting. I climbed into the truck cab, locked all the doors, kept the headlamp rotating outside. Around 11 p.m. I dozed off without meaning to, just for a moment. Microsleep, that dangerous state where you're not awake, but not fully asleep either. When I jerked awake, my headlamp was off, battery dead. I fumbled for my spare headlamp, clicked it on. The shadows were closer. Right outside my truck now, pressed against the windows. 3 of them, surrounding the cab. I could see them clearly in my headlamp beam now, not just shadows anymore. They had texture, substance. They were figures, tall, wrong proportions, with something branching from their heads. Antlers. I screamed. Couldn't help it. Pure primal terror. The figures pulled back, retreating to the 25-foot perimeter. But they didn't leave, just repositioned themselves. Patient. I kept my spare headlamp on for the rest of the night. Didn't sleep. Didn't even try. Just sat in the driver's seat with all doors locked, light blazing, watching the figures maintain their perimeter. Dawn came at 6:42 a.m. The figures faded with the darkness. By full sunrise, they were gone completely. I checked my water. 2 gallons left. I'd gone through 3 gallons in 2 days too much, too fast, but the heat and stress were brutal. I needed to ration more carefully. I checked my satellite communicator. New message. Tow truck delayed additional 24 hours. Permit issues unresolved. Confirm status. I stared at the message. Day 4. I'd be here for day 4. I sent back. Confirmed. Water supply adequate. Continuing to wait. That was a lie. My water wasn't adequate for another full day in this heat. But what choice did I have? I couldn't walk out 18 miles in 100-degree heat. With minimal water was suicide. I had to wait. Day 3 was worse than day 2. Temperature hit 106. I was down to 1 gallon of water by noon, rationing it in tiny sips. Dehydration was setting in, headache, dizziness, dark urine. I knew the symptoms, was monitoring myself clinically, professionally, knew I was approaching dangerous thresholds. But I was still functional, still conscious, still able to think. The heat made me drowsy. I'd microsleep without meaning, to just close my eyes for a second, then jerk awake minutes later. Dangerous, disorienting. Each time I woke, I'd check the perimeter, and each time I'd see new boot prints in the sand. Closer circles. The perimeter was tightening. 50 feet on day 1, 30 feet on day 2, 20 feet on day 3. They were patient, methodical, waiting for me to weaken. Sunset on day 3 arrived with a sense of dread I'd never experienced before. I knew what was coming. The shadows appeared as the sun touched the horizon. 3 figures, standing at the 20-foot perimeter. Taller than before, more solid, more real. I turned on my headlamp, my last one, with fresh batteries. The beam was strong, bright. The figures retreated to the edge of the light. I kept the light on as darkness fell. Around 9 p.m., my hands started shaking. Dehydration, exhaustion, fear, all of it together. I drank the last of my water. 1 gallon gone over the course of the day, nothing left. I was out of water, out of light soon, out of time. The figures stood at the perimeter, perfectly patient, waiting. Around 11 p.m., I started hallucinating. Knew I was hallucinating because I could see my dead father standing next to one of the figures, waving at me. My father had died in 2011. He wasn't here. But the dehydration was making my brain misfire, creating images that weren't real, except the figures were real. I knew that, could feel it. At 11:43 p.m., one of the figures stepped forward, walked up to my driver's side window, stood right outside the glass, and knocked 3 times. Polite, deliberate, like a person asking permission to enter. I stared at it through the window. It was tall, maybe 7 feet. Gray skin stretched too tight over bones that were the wrong shape. Arms too long, hanging past where knees should be. Hands with too many fingers, each ending in a dark point. And the head, God, the head. A deer skull. Bleached white, empty eye sockets. But the jaw moved, opening and closing slowly, like it was tasting the air. Antlers spread wide from the skull, branching at impossible angles. It knocked again. Same rhythm. 3 deliberate taps. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Just sat there staring. It raised one hand, placed the palm against the glass. 5 fingers. No 6, 7, 8. The hand kept shifting, changing, adding fingers that appeared and disappeared. The glass began to frost where it touched. Ice crystals spreading in a web pattern even though the outside temperature was still in the 70s. I grabbed my headlamp, aimed it directly at the figure's face. It didn't vanish this time, just turned its head slowly, looking directly at the light, those empty eye sockets somehow focusing on the beam. Then it smiled. The jaw opened wide, wider than physics should allow, revealing rows of teeth that looked like broken glass. I screamed again, raw terror. The sound filled the truck cab, bouncing off windows, hurting my own ears. The figure pulled its hand back from the glass. The frost patterns remained. It turned and walked back to the perimeter, rejoined the other 2 figures. They stood there, watching, for the rest of the night. My headlamp died at 4:17 a.m. I sat in complete darkness, waiting to die, waiting for them to come through the windows, waiting for whatever happens when the light finally fails. But they didn't advance. Just stood at the perimeter, waiting. For what? Dawn came at 6:43 a.m. The first gray light appeared on the eastern horizon. The figures began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. By full sunrise, I was alone. I checked my satellite communicator with shaking hands. New message. Tow truck en route. ETA 8. 8 a.m. 2 hours away. I made it. The tow truck arrived at 8:27 a.m. Driver was a woman in her 50s, weathered face, professional demeanor. She took one look at me and said, "You look like hell." I probably did. Dehydrated, exhausted, sunburned, hollow-eyed. She gave me water. I drank 2 bottles immediately. While she was hooking up my truck, she walked the perimeter, came back frowning. "You walk circles around your truck at night?" she asked. "No." "Huh." She pointed at the sand. "Well, someone did. Perfect circles. 3 different radiuses. Fresh prints." She looked at me carefully. "You okay out here alone?" "I am now." She nodded slowly. "We get breakdowns on this road maybe twice a year. Folks usually do fine. But sometimes." She trailed off. "Sometimes they report weird stuff. Shadows. Sounds. Footprints that don't make sense." "What do you tell them?" "Tell them it's heat exhaustion, dehydration, isolation playing tricks." She looked at the circles in the sand again. "But between you and me, I don't drive this road after dark. Haven't for 20 years. She towed my truck out. Got me back to civilization. I spent 6 hours in an urgent care getting IV fluids for dehydration. The doctor asked if I'd experienced any hallucinations. I said yes. He nodded, made notes. Common with severe dehydration, the brain misfires, creates images, sounds, false memories. I didn't correct him. When I got home, I checked my truck thoroughly. The frost patterns on the driver's side window were still there, permanently etched into the glass. 8 finger marks spreading out from a central palm print. I tried to buff them out. Couldn't. The glass was marked at a molecular level. I replaced the window. Told the mechanic it was vandalism. He looked at the pattern and said, "Weird vandalism. Looks like something tried to push through from outside." I never took that contract route again. Requested different territories. My company didn't ask why. But here's what I learned, and here's what I'll tell anyone who works remote desert roads. If your vehicle breaks down and you have to wait for rescue, watch what happens at sunset. If shadows appear that don't match their rocks, if they stand upright when they should be horizontal, if they move independently of their light source, don't wait for them to get closer. Call for emergency extraction. Hike out in darkness if you have to. Anything is better than waiting through multiple nights while they tighten their perimeter. Because they're patient. They understand time better than we do. They know exactly how long it takes for humans to run out of water, out of light, out of the will to stay awake. And when you're weak enough, when you're right at the edge of giving up, that's when they knock. Politely. 3 times. Asking permission. Don't answer. Story 4. The Sema Dome Research Camp. On the 8th night, I realized the shadow inside my tent had been watching me sleep for hours, and it was shaped like me. I'm a botanist, 33 years old. I specialize in desert plant adaptation, specifically how endemic species respond to climate stress. I've spent the last 8 years working across the Mojave and Sonoran deserts, conducting field research that requires extended solo camps in remote locations. I know how to set up long-term research sites, collect data methodically, survive weeks of isolation, know the difference between solitude and loneliness, between observation and paranoia. What happened at Sema Dome wasn't paranoia. April 4th through April 19th, 2024, I established a 2-week research camp at Sema Dome in Mojave National Preserve to study Joshua tree pollination patterns and monitor stress indicators in response to the ongoing drought. Sema Dome is a broad geological uplift covered in one of the densest Joshua tree forests in the world. Thousands of trees scattered across volcanic soil, creating an otherworldly landscape. My research required continuous presence. Daily measurements, morning and evening observation periods, overnight monitoring of nocturnal pollinators. 2 weeks minimum, to collect adequate data for my paper. I set up base camp on April 4th at 2 p.m. on the eastern slope of the dome where Joshua trees grew in thick clusters. Flat area roughly 40 feet across, good drainage, close to my primary study plots but far enough from the established trail that I'd have privacy. Standard research camp setup. 8 by 10 foot 3-season tent, lightweight but durable, rated for 3-season desert use. Cot with sleeping bag rated to 30 degrees, more than adequate for April temperatures. Folding table for data processing and equipment maintenance. Equipment bins organized by function, 1 for measurement tools, 1 for sample collection, 1 for electronics and batteries. Solar panel array mounted on a collapsible frame capable of charging my laptop, camera batteries, GPS units, and headlamp simultaneously. 50 gallons of water in 5 collapsible 10-gallon containers, enough for drinking, cooking, and minimal hygiene for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of dehydrated meals, carefully calculated for caloric needs, supplemented with fresh food for the first 3 days, apples, carrots, cheese that would keep. Satellite communicator for emergencies, programmed with ranger station contact and my university's field safety office. Comprehensive first aid kit. Portable weather station logging, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, wind speed. Camera traps positioned at key locations to document nocturnal wildlife activity around the study plots. I'd done this exact setup 24 times across my career. Death Valley, Anza Borrego, White Sands, Oregon Pipe. This was routine field work. Professional botanist conducting standard ecological research. The first week was productive and uneventful in the way good field work should be. I established my daily rhythm immediately. Wake at 5 a.m. when the first gray light appeared. Make coffee on my camp stove while reviewing the day's objectives. Morning observation round at 6 a.m. Sharp, walking a 3-mile circuit through my established study plots, checking each of the 40 tagged Joshua trees I was monitoring, recording any changes in bloom status, measuring flower production, documenting pollinator damage, or successful fertilization. Data collection from 7 a.m. to noon, detailed measurements with calipers and measuring tape, dendrometer band readings to track trunk expansion, soil moisture readings at standardized depths, photographic documentation of each specimen from consistent angles. Lunch and data processing from noon to 2 p.m., transferring handwritten field notes to my laptop, backing up photographs, updating my research database. Afternoon observation round from 3 to 6 p.m., second circuit of the study plots, recording afternoon conditions, checking overnight camera trap footage, repositioning equipment as needed. Dinner and equipment maintenance from 6 to 8 p.m., rehydrating meals, cleaning tools, charging batteries, reviewing the next day's protocol. Evening pollinator monitoring from 8 to 10 p.m., the critical work, watching yucca moths emerge at dusk, documenting their visits to Joshua tree flowers, recording successful pollination events with night vision capable cameras. Sleep by 11 p.m., structured, methodical, scientific. The work itself was going exceptionally well. I was documenting patterns that supported my central hypothesis that drought stress affects Joshua tree reproductive timing in ways that could desynchronize them from their obligate pollinators, the yucca moths. This was important work, conservation critical work. Joshua trees are already facing climate stress across their range. If I could demonstrate that pollination windows were shifting, it would inform management strategies across the entire Mojave ecosystem. The data was clean. My sample size was robust. I was getting publication quality results. The Joshua trees themselves were magnificent specimens to work with. Sema Dome hosts some of the finest Joshua tree forests in existence, higher density than Joshua Tree National Park, more genetic diversity than the populations in Red Rock Canyon. Some of my study trees were absolute giants, over 20 feet tall with trunks 18 inches in diameter. The oldest specimens I was monitoring had to be at least 200 years old based on growth ring analysis from cores I'd taken during preliminary surveys. Their structure is otherworldly if you really study it. The way the branches fork at unpredictable angles, creating fractal patterns that maximize sun exposure while minimizing water loss. The way the spiky leaf clusters armor the growing tips against herbivory. the way the flowers emerge in huge creamy clusters at branch ends, like alien chandeliers suspended against the desert sky. During the day, the trees cast complex shadows across the volcanic soil, twisted, organic shapes that shifted constantly as the sun tracked across the sky. I had grown familiar with those shadows over the first week, could identify individual trees by their shadow patterns, use them as landmarks when navigating between study plots. Normal shadows, predictable shadows, shadows that follow the laws of physics and geometry. I was comfortable with them. They were part of the landscape, part of the research environment, part of the daily rhythm that made fieldwork feel safe and controlled. The other shadows appeared on night 8. April 11th, the 8th night of my 2-week research period, exactly at the midpoint of my scheduled time. I'd spent the day collecting what might have been my best pollination data, yet documenting 15 separate yucca moth visits to a single tree, each visit resulting in successful pollen transfer. Photographed the entire sequence, recorded timestamps, moth behavior, flower responses. This was the kind of comprehensive observation that builds strong research papers. I was satisfied with the day's work. Ate dinner around 7 p.m., sitting outside my tent on my folding stool, rehydrated pasta primavera with dehydrated vegetables, not gourmet, but adequate calories and nutrition. Watched the sunset while I ate, enjoying that spectacular golden hour light that makes the Mojave feel like another planet. The Joshua trees glowed almost white against the darkening eastern sky, their silhouettes stark and dramatic. I had photographed this exact scene 24 times over the past week, documenting how the light changed, how shadows shifted, building a visual record of the site that would supplement my data tables and graphs. As twilight deepened to darkness, I cleaned my dishes with sand and minimal water, hung my food bag from its designated pole 20 feet from camp, secured my equipment bins. Standard evening routine, everything normal. I retreated to my tent around 8:30 p.m., earlier than some nights, but I was feeling the accumulated fatigue of a week in the field. Set up my headlamp on its hanging hook inside the tent, positioned my laptop on the folding table I'd set up at the foot of my cot. Spent the next hour organizing my field notes from the day, transferring GPS waypoints, backing up photographs to an external hard drive. Around 9:30 p.m., I shut down my laptop to conserve battery. My solar panels were good, but 2 weeks of continuous laptop use required discipline and power management. Switched my headlamp to low mode, changed into my sleep base layers, brushed my teeth outside the tent with a cup of water, spat into the volcanic soil, climbed back into my tent, zipped the door closed, settled onto my cot. The tent fabric glowed faintly orange from my headlamp's low setting, creating a warm enclosed space. Outside, the desert had gone quiet in that deep nighttime way, no insects, no birds, just occasional wind through the Joshua trees, creating that distinctive whisper and rattle sound their spiky leaves make when air moves through them. I was positioned on my back on the cot, sleeping bag pulled up to my chest, reading a field guide to Mojave moths I'd brought for reference, trying to confirm the species I had observed earlier. I was drifting towards sleep, book resting on my chest, when I noticed the shadow on the tent wall. It was on the north wall of my tent, opposite from where I lay on my cot, human-shaped, sitting upright, like someone was positioned outside the tent, pressed against the fabric, creating a silhouette. I opened my eyes fully and stared at it. The shadow was detailed. I could see shoulders, a head, arms positioned at its sides. The proportions were roughly human, maybe 5'10", 5'11", adult male build. I turned my head to look at my own position. I was lying on my back on the cot, sleeping bag pulled up to my chest, arms inside the bag. The shadow on the tent wall was sitting upright. It wasn't my shadow. I sat up slowly, watching to see if the shadow changed as I moved. It didn't. It remained in a sitting position, unchanged, independent of my movement. I grabbed my headlamp and aimed it directly at the shadow. It vanished in the beam of light. I climbed out of my sleeping bag, moved to the tent wall where the shadow had been, unzipped the window mesh, looked outside. Nothing. Empty desert. Joshua trees standing dark and still in the starlight. No animals, no people, no equipment that could cast that kind of shadow. I zipped the window closed, returned to my cot, turned off my headlamp. The shadow reappeared immediately. Same position, sitting upright on the north tent wall. I had turned my headlamp back on and kept it on, positioned it on the tent floor, angled to illuminate the entire interior. The shadow stayed gone as long as the light remained on. I lay back down and tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Tent shadows are normal. Light from stars or moon can create silhouettes on tent fabric. Animals passing near the tent cast shadows. Equipment positioned at certain angles can create human-like shapes. But the shadow had appeared when my headlamp was the only light source, and it was inside the tent, meaning it would require a light source outside the tent and an object between that external light and the tent wall. There was no external light source. No moon tonight. I'd checked the lunar calendar when planning my research. New moon phase. Just stars. And the shadow had been too detailed, too consistent, too deliberately positioned to be random. I kept my headlamp on for the rest of the night, burned through a full battery charge, didn't sleep. Dawn came at 6:18 a.m. I emerged from my tent, exhausted and rattled, but functional. Made coffee on my camp stove, ate a protein bar, tried to focus on my research schedule for the day. I had observation rounds to complete, data to collect, measurements to record. The work didn't stop because I'd had a strange night. But I couldn't shake the image of that shadow, sitting upright, positioned like it was watching me sleep. I checked the perimeter of my tent, looking for footprints or disturbances in the soil. Nothing obvious. The volcanic soil around Sema Dome is rocky and compacted, not ideal for showing tracks, but I could see my own boot prints clearly enough from my movements over the past week. If someone had been standing outside my tent last night, there should be evidence. I found it 30 feet from my tent. A single boot print and a small patch of sandy soil between rocks. Clear tread pattern. Men's hiking boot. Size looked like 11 or 12. I knelt down and examined it closely. The print was fresh made within the last 12 hours, based on the crisp edges. Definitely not mine. I wear size 9. Someone had been near my camp last night. I pulled out my satellite communicator, considered sending a message to park rangers. Possible intruder near research camp. But what would they do? Send a ranger out to check on me, maybe? But more likely, just tell me to pack up if I felt unsafe. I had 8 more days of research planned. Critical data collection I couldn't easily replicate. If I abandoned the site now, I'd lose the entire study. I decided to continue. Stay alert. Keep my headlamp charged. Lock my tent at night. The zippers had small loops I could clip together with a carabiner from the inside. Not perfect security, but something. Day 9 was productive despite my exhaustion. I collected good pollination data, photographed 3 different yucca moth species visiting Joshua tree flowers, recorded temperature and humidity readings that matched my predictions. By sunset, I was running on adrenaline and caffeine, fighting the exhaustion from 0 sleep the night before. I ate dinner quickly, secured my camp, climbed into my tent around 8 p.m. earlier than usual, but I needed rest. I locked the tent zippers with a carabiner, positioned my headlamp within reach, and lay down on my cot. Turned off my headlamp. The shadow appeared immediately on the north tent wall, but it was different now. It was lying down, in the same position I was lying in, on its back, arms at its sides, exactly mirroring my posture. I sat up fast. The shadow sat up with me. I raised my right arm. The shadow raised its right arm. I turned my head to the left. The shadow turned its head to the left. It was mimicking me, perfectly synchronized. Every movement I made, it made simultaneously. My heart was hammering. I grabbed my headlamp with shaking hands, clicked it on. The shadow vanished. I kept the light on, breathing hard, trying to process this. This wasn't someone outside my tent. This wasn't a trick of light and fabric. This was something impossible, something that could perfectly mirror my movements while positioned on a tent wall 5 feet away. I aimed my headlamp at the tent wall, swept it across every inch of fabric, looking for tears or transparency that might explain this. The tent was intact. Opaque. No external light sources visible. I turned off the headlamp. The shadow reappeared, lying in the exact position I was in, right arm extended, holding an invisible headlamp, perfectly matching me. I turned the headlamp back on and kept it on. Sat there on my cot, fully awake, knowing I wouldn't sleep. The next 6 nights followed an escalating pattern that I documented in my field notebook with the same methodical detail I applied to my botanical research. Some part of me needed to record it, to make it data, to give it structure even if I couldn't explain it. Night 9, April 12th. The shadow appeared at 9:47 p.m. when I turned off my headlamp. Still on the north tent wall. Still lying down, mirroring my position perfectly. When I sat up, it sat up. When I moved my left arm, it moved its left arm in perfect synchronization. Zero delay. Impossible physics. I kept my headlamp on for most of the night, dozing in 30-minute increments, with light blazing, jerking awake when exhaustion made me careless. Slept maybe 2 hours total. Night 10, April 13th. Shadow appeared at 9:32 p.m. Mirroring behavior continued, but with a new detail I noticed around midnight during one of my forced awake headlamp on periods. When I turned the light off briefly to test if the shadow was still there, it was. But it wasn't just mirroring anymore. It was mimicking with a 1-second delay. I'd move my arm, and the shadow would move its arm 1 second later. Like it was learning the movements, processing them, then reproducing them with slightly more independence. I kept detailed notes, documented the delay timing, tried to maintain scientific objectivity, slept maybe 90 minutes, all of it in the early morning hours when exhaustion finally overwhelmed fear. Night 11, April 14th. Shadow appeared at 9:15 p.m. The delay had increased to 2 seconds. I'd move, it would pause, then copy the movement, like it was thinking, deciding, choosing to mimic rather than being forced to mirror. The difference felt significant. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something else when I turned my headlamp on. The shadow took longer to vanish. Maybe half a second of persistence before it faded, like it was getting stronger, more resistant to light. I didn't sleep at all that night. Just sat on my cot with my headlamp cycling between on and off, testing, documenting, trying to understand the rules. Night 12, April 15th. Shadow appeared at 8:58 p.m., almost an hour earlier than previous nights. The delay was now 3 to 4 seconds, and the movements were no longer exact copies. The shadow would approximate my movements, but with variations. If I scratched my face, it would move its hand toward its head but not complete the gesture. If I shifted position on the cot, it would shift but differently, independently. It was evolving from mimic to autonomous. I was running on pure adrenaline now, maybe 45 minutes of sleep over the past 3 nights combined. My hands shook when I tried to write field notes. My vision had that fuzzy quality that comes before hallucination. But I kept working, kept documenting, because the alternative was admitting this was beyond documentation. Night 13, April 16th. The shadow appeared at 8:37 p.m. while it was still twilight outside, faint purple light filtering through the tent fabric. First time it had manifested before full darkness. The mirroring had stopped completely. It moved independently now, shifting positions on the tent wall without regard to what I was doing. Sometimes it would lie down when I sat up, sometimes it would sit when I lay down, sometimes it would turn its head toward me and just watch. I could feel it watching even though it was a flat silhouette on fabric. At 3 a.m. I saw something that made my remaining rationality crumble. The shadow raised its hand and waved at me. Slow, deliberate wave. Not copying me. Initiating contact. I turned on my headlamp, and the shadow persisted for a full 2 seconds before fading, and in those 2 seconds I saw details I hadn't seen before. The antlers weren't smooth. They had texture, branching complexity, details that shouldn't be visible on a simple shadow. I didn't sleep at all. Couldn't even close my eyes. Night 14, April 17th was the breaking point. By night 14, April 17th, I was barely functional. 6 nights of minimal sleep, accumulated exhaustion creating a dangerous fog over my judgment. I had completed my data collection earlier that day, had everything I needed for my research paper, every measurement recorded, every photograph taken, every observation documented. Just 2 more nights until my planned departure date of April 19th. I could make it. 48 hours. Then I'd pack up, drive out, sleep in a motel in Baker with lights on and real walls and the safety of civilization. Just 48 more hours. I went through my evening routine mechanically, body on autopilot, while my mind floated somewhere above the exhaustion. Made dinner rehydrated chili that I ate without tasting. Cleaned dishes, hung food bag. Secured equipment. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like moving through deep water. I climbed into my tent at 9 p.m., much earlier than my normal schedule, but I couldn't stay upright anymore. Locked the tent zippers with my carabiner, a superstitious ritual that I knew was meaningless but did anyway. Lay down on my cot without changing clothes, without brushing teeth, without any of my normal pre-sleep routine. Just lay there, staring at the tent ceiling in the orange glow of my headlamp. I knew what was coming. Knew the shadow would appear the moment I turned off the light. Knew it would be worse tonight because it had been worse every night, escalating, building towards something. But I was too tired to care anymore. Too exhausted to maintain fear. I turned off my headlamp. The shadow appeared on the tent wall, but it didn't mirror me this time. It was already in its own position before I had even settled on the cot. It was sitting upright while I was lying down. I watched it through half-closed eyes, too tired to even sit up and respond. The shadow sat perfectly still for maybe 30 seconds, just sitting, positioned like it was meditating or resting or thinking. Then it turned its head toward me. That deliberate rotation, slow and controlled, head pivoting on its neck like a barn owl tracking prey. The silhouette on the tent wall shifted, the head shape moving from profile to three-quarter view to facing directly toward where I lay on my cot. I should have been terrified. Should have grabbed my headlamp, should have run, should have done something. But I just watched, detached, observing it, the way I'd observe a moth visiting a flower, clinical, documentary. The shadow stood up, slow rise from sitting to standing, movements fluid and natural like a real person standing from a chair. It reached full height on the tent wall, roughly 6 feet tall. Human proportions, but wrong somehow, stretched or compressed in ways I couldn't quite identify. Then it started walking, not across the tent wall horizontally, the way a shadow should move if cast by something walking parallel to the tent. It was walking toward me, through space. The shadow moving across the fabric surface like it was navigating three-dimensional terrain, approaching my position with deliberate steps. Each step brought it closer. The shadow's size was increasing as it approached, growing larger, taking up more of the tent wall with each movement. That's when my exhaustion broke and fear flooded back in. I grabbed my headlamp with hands that were suddenly shaking violently, clicked it on with the third try. The shadow didn't vanish. It remained visible in the LED beam, standing on the tent wall maybe 3 feet from my cot now, significantly larger than when it had started. Tall, detailed, real in ways that shadows shouldn't be real. I could see everything now in perfect clarity. The antlers spreading from the head weren't simple branches. They had complex geometry, fractal branching, recursive patterns, angles that hurt to follow with my eyes, the kind of structure that appears in nature but shouldn't appear in shadows. The arms hanging at its sides were too long. Not dramatically, just enough to be wrong. Maybe 6 inches longer than human arms should be in proportion to that torso. The body proportions were almost human, but slightly distorted, like someone had taken a normal human silhouette and stretched it vertically by 10%. And the fingers. God, the fingers. Too many of them. I counted 7 on the hand I could see clearly. 7 long, thin fingers splayed out against the tent fabric. I screamed. Couldn't help it. Raw sound of pure terror ripping out of my throat. The shadow stopped walking. We stayed frozen like that, me pressed back against the far tent wall, headlamp blazing, breathing in ragged gasps, and the shadow standing motionless on the fabric 3 feet away. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then it reached out. One arm extended across the tent wall, surfaced toward me, fingers splaying wider, not three-dimensional. Still just a shadow on fabric, two-dimensional, impossible. But moving with clear intention. The shadow hand touched the tent wall directly above where I sat on my cot. The fabric dimpled inward where it touched. I watched the nylon bow inward from inside the tent, forming a depression in the exact shape of that seven-fingered hand. Like pressure was being applied from the inside, not the outside. Like the shadow was pushing through from the tent wall itself. The fabric stretched, deformed. The shadow hand pressed deeper. I could see the individual finger shapes now, 7 clear impressions pushing the nylon inward, stretching it toward me. Then the shadow pulled back. Arm retracting smoothly, the fabric popping back to its normal shape. The shadow returned to its standing position, arm at its side again. We stared at each other, me and the impossible shadow, and then it spoke. The voice came from the tent wall, from the shadow itself, from everywhere and nowhere. My voice. Not similar to my voice, not a recording or imitation. My exact voice, my pitch, my tone, my inflection, my speech patterns, speaking 2 words, time to sleep, the way I would say it. The exact phrasing I used in my own internal monologue when telling myself to stop reading and turn off the light. My voice, coming from a shadow, telling me to sleep. That broke me completely. Some final thread of rational thought snapped. Some last reserve of courage evaporated. I grabbed my boots from beside the cot, shoved my feet into them without lacing, grabbed my satellite communicator from the equipment bin, grabbed my truck keys from the mesh pocket sewn into the tent wall, unclipped the tent zippers with shaking hands that barely functioned. The carabiner fell to the tent floor. Didn't matter. Didn't care. Threw open the tent door and ran. Barefoot, essentially, boots flopping unlaced on my feet, laces dragging in the dirt, boots threatening to come off with every step. Didn't matter. Just ran. Through the Joshua tree forest in full darkness, headlamp beam bouncing wildly with each step, creating jerking shadows on the twisted trees, making everything look alive and threatening. Branches reaching toward me. Shapes moving in peripheral vision. I knew the path to my truck. 1/2 mile from camp. I'd walked it twice daily for 2 weeks, could navigate it blindfolded. I ran it in maybe 3 minutes, gasping, stumbling, boots flopping, branches scraping my arms and face. Made it to my truck, a white Toyota Tacoma, parked under a massive Joshua tree, covered in 2 weeks of dust. Fumbled the keys. Dropped them in the dirt. Couldn't see them. Headlamp beam was bouncing too much from my shaking. I dropped to my knees, swept my hands across the ground, found the keys by touch, stood up, got the door open, climbed into the driver's seat, locked all 4 doors immediately, started the engine with the 3rd try, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. The truck roared to life, headlights blazing, dashboard lights glowing, radio coming on automatically, some country station out of Barstow, a song about highways and leaving. I put it in drive and drove. 40 miles per hour on dirt roads, designed for 15. Washboard sections rattling my teeth. Rocky patches where the suspension bottomed out. Dips and climbs that made the truck lurch. Didn't care. Just drove. Headlights on high beam, showing the road ahead in harsh white light. Trees whipping past on both sides. Made it to the paved road, Sema Road. 2 lanes of blessed asphalt, turned west toward Baker. Kept driving. Didn't slow down until I was on Interstate 15, doing 75 in the right lane, surrounded by semi-trucks and RVs and normal people doing normal things. Made it to Baker 45 minutes after leaving my tent. Pulled into a Chevron station, parked under the bright fluorescent canopy lights. Sat there with the engine running, AC on full blast even though it was April and cool outside, all the lights on, radio playing. Sat there shaking for 20 minutes, hands gripped on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. A trucker knocked on my window eventually. Big guy, late 50s, concerned expression. "You okay, buddy?" I nodded, didn't trust my voice. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." I nodded again. He looked at me for another moment, then shrugged and walked away. I sat there until dawn. 6 hours. Just sat in my truck under the gas station lights, surrounded by the sounds of the interstate and civilization and safety. When the sun came up at 6:23 a.m., I finally felt like I could breathe again. I returned to Sema Dome the next morning, April 18th. Full daylight, 9:30 a.m. with 2 park rangers I'd requested through the official emergency contact system. Told them I'd had a wildlife encounter that scared me off my research site, needed assistance collecting my equipment. They didn't ask too many questions. Happens sometimes in remote research bears, mountain lions, aggressive elk. People get spooked and need backup for equipment recovery. Ranger Torres was the senior officer, maybe 60 years old, weathered face, calm professional demeanor. The other ranger was younger, female, name tag said Lopez, both armed, both carrying radios, both completely unfazed by the request. We drove to my research site in 2 vehicles, my truck and their ranger patrol truck, parked at the trailhead. Hiked the half-mile to my camp in full daylight with birds singing and Joshua trees standing peacefully in morning sun. My tent was exactly as I'd left it, door hanging open from when I'd run, my cot visible inside with the sleeping bag tangled and thrown aside, research equipment bins lined up neatly. Solar panel array still functioning, lights blinking green on the charge controllers, no signs of intrusion, no animal tracks, no damage. Everything intact and normal. Except for one thing. Ranger Torres stopped at the tent entrance, looking at the floor inside. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. I looked. On the tent floor directly below where the north tent wall was positioned, there was a mark, not a shadow, a permanent discoloration. The tent floor fabric gray waterproof nylon had been bleached in a perfect silhouette. The shape was human, standing upright, arms at sides, roughly 6 feet tall, with branching shapes spreading from the head area, antlers. The discoloration was deep, permanent, like the fabric had been chemically treated or exposed to intense UV radiation for hours. The surrounding tent floor was normal gray. The silhouette was pale white. Lopez photographed it from multiple angles. Torres crouched down, touched the fabric carefully. "Weird," he said quietly. "Looks like a bleach stain, but there's no chemical smell." "Has this happened before?" I asked, my voice hoarse from not speaking for 12 hours. Torres and Lopez exchanged a look. "You're the 3rd researcher to report something at Sema in the past 5 years," Torres said carefully. "First one who left the same night it started. What happened to the others?" "They stayed. Completed their full research periods." He stood up, brushing dust off his knees. "Both of them had experiences similar to what I'm guessing you had. Both filed incident reports. Both had psychiatric evaluations afterward through their universities. And one doesn't do field work anymore. Switched to lab-based research exclusively. The other one," he paused, "said he can't sleep in the dark anymore. Any darkness. Has to have lights on 24 hours a day. Even with lights on, he has trouble. Last I heard, he was on medical leave." Lopez was still photographing the tent floor silhouette. "This is the clearest physical evidence we've gotten, though," she said. "The other 2 sites had anomalies, strange marks, but nothing this defined." "What do you think it is?" I asked. Torres looked at me for a long moment. "Off the record?" "Off the record. I think there's something in this Joshua tree forest that we don't understand. Something old. Something that doesn't like people camping alone in its territory." He glanced at the tent floor mark again. "On the record, we'll document this as unknown origin staining, possibly chemical contamination, or unusual mineral exposure." We packed up my equipment over the next 3 hours. Broke down the tent carefully, documenting the floor mark from every angle. Collected my research bins, my solar panels, my weather station, my camera traps. Everything went into my truck bed, secured with straps and bungee cords. I left Sema Dome by 1 p.m., following the ranger truck out. They escorted me all the way to the paved road, then waved and headed back to their patrol duties. I drove to Baker, checked into a motel, slept for 16 hours straight, with every light in the room, on ceiling light, bathroom light, bedside lamp, television playing muted infomercials. Woke up and immediately checked the tent floor silhouette photographs on my camera. Still there, still clear, still impossible to explain. I shipped the tent to my university's lab requesting materials analysis of the discolored section. The results came back 3 weeks later. Fabric shows uniform degradation of pigmentation consistent with long-term UV exposure or chemical bleaching. No chemical residues detected. Pattern of degradation is highly unusual, suggests localized exposure over extended period, minimum 48 to 72 hours. Origin unknown. I published my research paper 6 months later. Phenological desynchronization in Yucca brevifolia and associated pollinator communities under drought stress conditions. Strong data, clear conclusions. The paper won the Desert Research Foundation's annual award for outstanding field ecology research, but I never did solo field research again. Couldn't. Thought of spending nights alone in a tent, watching shadows on fabric in the dark, created immediate panic attacks. Heart racing, hyperventilation, cold sweats. I switched to day-use fieldwork exclusively. In before sunrise, out before sunset. Always. I trained graduate students to do overnight monitoring. Hired field techs for extended research periods. Found collaborative projects where I could work with partners, never alone. My colleagues noticed. My department chair asked about it during my annual review. I told her I'd developed a sleep disorder that made camping difficult. Not technically a lie. The tent floor silhouette is still in a storage locker at my university, labeled as Unusual Field Specimen Sema Dome Site 2024. Sometimes graduate students ask about it. I tell them it's evidence of unknown photochemical degradation processes, also not technically a lie, because here's what I learned. If you're camping alone and you see shadows inside your tent that don't match your position, that move independently, that start to mimic you, don't wait to see what happens next. Don't try to rationalize it. Don't convince yourself it's exhaustion or tricks of light. Pack up immediately. Leave in darkness if necessary, because those shadows are testing you, learning you, preparing to become you. And by the time they start speaking in your voice, you've already stayed too long. Story 5. The Soda Lake Vigil. My time-lapse camera captured 5 nights of footage, and in every frame there's a shadow standing at the edge of camp that shouldn't exist on a flat lake bed. I'm an astrophotographer, 31 years old. I specialize in Milky Way composites and time-lapse sequences of dark sky locations across the western United States. I've shot from White Sands, Bonneville Salt Flats, the Alvord Desert, Death Valley's Racetrack Playa. I know how to work in extreme isolation, set up complex camera systems, operate in total darkness, know the difference between actual phenomena and camera artifacts, between real movement and sensor noise. What my cameras recorded at Soda Dry Lake wasn't an artifact. May 3rd through May 8th, 2024. I drove to Soda Dry Lake in the Mojave Desert for a 5-night astrophotography project targeting the galactic core during new moon phase. Soda Lake is a massive dry lake bed, roughly 10 square miles of flat, cracked alkaline playa stretching between the I-15 corridor and the Soda Mountains. Perfect for astrophotography. Zero light pollution. Completely flat horizon in all directions. Dark skies rated Bortle, Class 1, the darkest possible designation. I had scouted the location 3 months earlier, identified the perfect shooting position on the eastern edge of the lake bed where I could frame the Milky Way rising over the mountains, obtained permits through BLM, checked weather forecasts obsessively, 5 consecutive clear nights forecast, no moon, minimal wind, ideal conditions. My equipment load was substantial. This wasn't a casual weekend shoot. This was a professional production requiring redundant systems and comprehensive coverage. Primary camera. Sony A7S III with Sigma 14mm f, 1.8 wide-angle lens, mounted on an iOptron Skyguider Pro star tracker for precise celestial tracking during long exposures. The tracker compensates for Earth's rotation, allowing exposures up to 5 minutes without star trails. Secondary camera, Canon R5 with Canon RF 24mm f, 1.4 lens for time-lapse sequences. set to shoot continuously through the night, building sequences that would compress hours into seconds. Tertiary camera, GoPro Hero 11 with wide-angle lens for behind-the-scenes documentation, positioned to capture my workflow, my silhouette against the stars, the overall camp setup. Marketing material, essentially, but also useful for documenting conditions and techniques. 3 tripods, Manfrotto carbon fiber professional models, each capable of supporting 15 pounds of camera and lens. Heavy-duty construction necessary for desert wind conditions. Star tracker with GPS alignment module, compass calibration, and polar scope for precise celestial positioning. Critical for long exposures, even slight misalignment creates trailing. Intervalometers for automated shooting sequences. Set and forget programming allowing the cameras to work while I reviewed data. 12 Sony NP FC100 camera batteries, fully charged. 4 high-capacity Anker power banks with 20,000 mAh capacity each. Laptop MacBook Pro with M2 chip for image processing. 2 portable SSD drives for redundant storage. Samsung T7 2TB models. Camp chair. Sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees. 3-season tent. 5 days of food and water calculated at 1 gallon per day plus emergency reserves. Portable generator for charging equipment during daylight hours. Total weight, approximately 220 pounds of gear, loaded into my truck bed in organized bins and cases. I drove onto the lake bed on May 3rd at 3 p.m., having access via the unmarked dirt road that leads from Interstate 15. The approach required careful navigation. The transition from desert scrub to alkaline playa is gradual, the hard pan getting progressively harder until your tires are rolling across surface that feels like concrete. My truck, a 2022 Ford Ranger, 4-wheel drive, lifted suspension, handled it easily. I navigated carefully across the cracked alkaline surface, following my pre-programmed GPS coordinates, avoiding the softest-looking sections where crust appeared thinner. Drove 2 miles out from the access road, far enough to achieve complete isolation from any vehicle headlights that might appear on I-15 inches the distance. Close enough that I could escape quickly if weather turned. Thunderstorms can make playas impassable in minutes, the hardpan becoming slick mud. When I reached my predetermined GPS coordinates, 35.2687 north, 116.1342 west, I stopped and surveyed the location. Perfect. The lake bed stretched in every direction, absolutely flat, broken only by the distant mountain ranges on the horizons. Soda Mountains to the northeast, dark silhouettes against pale sky. Avawatz Mountains to the southwest. In between, nothing. No vegetation, no rocks, no terrain features at all. Just white alkaline crust stretching to every horizon, creating that distinctive playa appearance like standing on another planet. The isolation was absolute. The nearest human being was probably 50 miles away. The nearest structure was farther than that. Perfect for astrophotography. Terrifying for anything else. I spent the afternoon establishing camp with systematic precision. Tent erected on the lake bed surface, finding good stake placement in hardpan is challenging, but cracks in the alkaline crust provided adequate purchase. I used 8-inch steel stakes driven at 45-degree angles into the deepest cracks I could find. Equipment organized in my truck bed under a heavy-duty tarp secured with bungee cords. Camera position scouted and marked with small painted rocks I'd brought specifically for this purpose. 3 positions in an arc, each offering different compositional angles on the rising Milky Way. Power systems tested. Generator run for 30 minutes to verify operation. Power banks charged to 100%. Battery levels confirmed on all cameras. Everything methodical and professional. I had done shoots like this 24 times across different desert locations. This was routine. By 5 p.m. I had completed setup and was eating an early dinner, dehydrated beef stroganoff, rehydrated with hot water from my camp stove. Not gourmet, but adequate calories and nutrition for a long night's work. By sunset at 7:43 p.m., I had all 3 cameras positioned in their predetermined arc around my camp. Primary camera, positioned 15 feet south of my camp chair, aimed southeast toward the galactic core rise point. Star tracker, polar aligned using Polaris and the polar scope. Programmed for 3-minute tracked exposures at f 1.8 ISO 3200. Time-lapse camera, positioned 12 feet southwest of camp. Aim due south for wide-angle Milky Way coverage across the meridian. Program for 30-second exposures every 45 seconds. Building a sequence that would compress 8 hours into approximately 90 seconds of playback. GoPro. Position 10 feet northwest of camp. Aim back toward my setup to document my silhouette against the stars, my movements between cameras, the overall workflow. Set to shoot one frame every 20 minutes from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., 40 frames total, enough to build a behind-the-scenes time-lapse. Twilight began at 7:43 p.m. with sunset. The sky transitioned slowly, blue to purple, to deep indigo, to black. Stars emerged in their predictable sequence. First the planets, Jupiter bright in the west, Saturn rising in the southeast, then the brightest stars, Sirius, Vega, Arcturus, Spica, then dimmer stars, magnitude 3, magnitude 4, magnitude 5, then the Milky Way itself, appearing like smoke across the southern sky, solidifying as darkness deepened and my eyes adapted fully. By 8:37 p.m. it was dark enough to begin serious shooting. I started all 3 cameras on their programmed sequences, verified they were functioning correctly, then settled into my camp chair with my laptop to review the first test exposures. The data was exceptional. The primary camera was capturing the galactic core with extraordinary detail, dark dust lanes visible, bright star clusters resolved, nebulae showing structure. The time-lapse camera was building a clean sequence with consistent exposure. The GoPro was documenting my silhouette clearly against the star field. This was going to be portfolio quality work, potentially award-winning if the weather held for all 5 nights. I worked for 2 hours straight, reviewing images, adjusting camera settings slightly, monitoring battery levels, transferring files to my laptop for backup. Standard workflow, everything normal. Around 11 p.m. I took a break from technical work, turned off my laptop to save battery, switched off my red LED headlamp. I'd been using red mode to preserve night vision while working. Sat in complete darkness, letting my eyes fully dark adapt. This is the moment astrophotographers work for. Full dark adaptation takes 20 to 30 minutes, but when you achieve it, the night sky becomes something else entirely. Something impossible to see from cities, impossible to appreciate without complete darkness. The stars were extraordinary. With no moon and no artificial light for 50 miles in any direction, the sky was Bortle Class 1, the darkest possible rating on the light pollution scale. The Milky Way wasn't just visible, it was dominant. A glowing river stretching from southern horizon to northern horizon, so bright it cast actual shadows. I held up my hand against the starlight, could see a faint shadow on the white alkaline surface below. The Milky Way was bright enough to create shadows. Most people never experience that. I could see the Andromeda Galaxy with my naked eye, a faint fuzzy oval in the northern sky, 2.5 million light-years away, visible without optical aid. Could distinguish individual nebulae in Sagittarius, the Lagoon Nebula, the Trifid Nebula, faint glows marking stellar nurseries. Could count meteors 3 and 5 minutes, small debris burning up in the atmosphere, creating bright streaks through Cassiopeia and Perseus. This was why I did this work. Not for the photos, really. For this experience, this silence, this darkness, this connection to the universe that's impossible to feel anywhere near civilization. I sat there, absorbing it for maybe 20 minutes, not checking cameras, not reviewing data, just experiencing the sky. That's when I noticed the other shadow. It was at the edge of my camp perimeter, maybe 40 feet from where I sat in my camp chair, a dark vertical shape against the starlit lake bed, roughly human height, maybe 6 feet, maybe slightly taller, standing motionless. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Shadows on a lake bed require specific conditions. A light source, an object to block that light, and a surface for the shadow to fall on. I had the light source, the Milky Way, bright enough to cast shadows. I had the surface, the white alkaline playa, reflective enough to show shadows clearly. But I didn't have an object. The lake bed was completely flat. I'd surveyed this area thoroughly during setup. There were no rocks, no vegetation, no equipment positioned 40 feet from my camp. Nothing that could cast a shadow, and more critically, the Milky Way isn't a point source like the sun. It's diffuse light spread across the entire southern sky. It doesn't cast sharp, well-defined shadows. It creates soft, ambient illumination. Yet this shadow was sharp, crisp edges, clearly defined against the white surface. A distinct vertical silhouette. I clicked on my headlamp, white LED this time, maximum 500 lumens. The lake bed illuminated in harsh white light, washing out my night vision instantly. I swept the beam across the area where I'd seen the shadow. Empty. Completely empty. Flat white alkaline crust, stretching to the limit of my headlamp's range. No objects, no irregularities, no shadow. I walked toward the position, boots crunching on the hardpan, headlamp beam steady. Covered the 40 feet in, maybe 30 seconds. Arrived at the exact spot where the shadow had appeared. Nothing. Just lake bed. I crouched down, examined the surface closely. No footprints. No disturbances. No marks in the alkaline crust. I turned off my headlamp. Stood in darkness, letting my eyes adjust again. This takes time. Full dark adaptation requires 20 to 30 minutes after exposure to bright light. But even with partially adapted vision, I could see well enough. The shadow reappeared within 5 minutes of dark adaptation. Same position, same shape, vertical silhouette, roughly 6 feet tall, standing exactly where I was now standing. Except I was standing there, and the shadow was still visible, positioned as if there was an object between me and my camp chair 40 feet away. The geometry was impossible. I walked back to my camp, sat down in my chair, looked at the shadow from my original viewing position, still there, still motionless, still wrong. I needed to document this properly, needed evidence beyond my own perception. I grabbed my primary camera, the Sony A7S III, from its star tracker mount. This camera was exceptional in low light, with a sensor designed specifically for astrophotography. If anything could photograph a shadow visible only in starlight, this was it. I detached the 14mm lens, replaced it with a 70mm telephoto, pointed the camera toward the shadow's position, adjusted settings for the available light, ISO 25600, near the camera's maximum sensitivity, aperture f 2.8 wide open, shutter speed 30 seconds long enough to gather maximum light. I tripod mounted the camera for stability, aimed carefully at the shadow, triggered the exposure, 30 seconds of exposure time. The camera sensor gathering every available photon from that patch of lake bed. The exposure completed. I reviewed the image on the camera's LCD screen, zooming in to maximum magnification. The lake bed appeared in the frame, faintly illuminated by starlight. Surface detail, visible cracks in the alkaline crust, subtle texture variations. The image quality was remarkable, given the extreme low light conditions, but no shadow. The frame showed empty lake bed, no vertical object, no dark shape, nothing that corresponded to what my eyes were seeing. I took 3 more exposures, different exposure times 45 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, different ISO settings, 16,000, 25,000, 600, 32,000, different focal lengths, 70 millimeters, 100 millimeters, 200 millimeters. All frames showed the same thing, empty lake bed, no shadow visible. I looked up from the camera. The shadow was still there, perfectly visible to my dark adapted eyes, invisible to my camera sensor. This was impossible. Cameras and human eyes both detect photons. If I could see the shadow, the camera should record it. Unless the phenomenon was operating in wavelengths outside the camera's sensitivity range, ultraviolet or infrared, but even that didn't make sense. The Sony A7S III has extended spectral sensitivity. It picks up near UV and near IR. If the shadow existed in those wavelengths, the camera would show something, unless the shadow wasn't physical at all. unless it was some kind of optical phenomenon specific to the human visual system. But that didn't explain the sharp definition, the consistent position, the persistence. I sat back in my camp chair, thinking through this systematically. Then I remember the GoPro, the behind-the-scenes camera positioned 10 feet behind my chair, aimed back toward my setup, shooting one frame every 20 minutes. It wasn't aimed at the shadow directly. It was aimed at me in my camp, but the shadow was positioned 40 feet beyond me, which meant it should appear in the background of the GoPro's wide-angle frames. If the shadow was real, I retrieved the GoPro from its tripod, connected it to my laptop via USB-C, downloaded the footage captured so far. 7 frames. Shot at 20-minute intervals from 9 p.m. to 11:20 p.m. I opened the first frame in Photoshop, zoomed in to 100% magnification. The frame showed my camp setup clearly, my silhouette visible in the camp chair, lit faintly by the stars, my cameras positioned around me, the flat lake bed stretching beyond. And in the background, 40 feet behind my position, there was a dark vertical shape. Not a shadow, a solid dark mass, visible in the frame, recorded by the camera sensor. I felt my skin go cold. I opened the second frame, 8:20 p.m. The shape was still there, same position. Third frame, 8:40 p.m., still present. Fourth frame, 9 p.m., present. All 7 frames showed the same thing. A dark vertical shape standing in the background, visible to the GoPro camera even though it was invisible when I aimed a camera directly at it. I zoomed in maximum magnification on the clearest frame, the one from 9:40 p.m., when the Milky Way had risen higher, providing slightly more ambient light. The shape was detailed. Humanoid proportions, but wrong somehow. Too tall, maybe 7 feet. Too narrow. Arms that seemed too long, hanging past where hips should be. And, at the top branching projections, multiple points spreading from the head area. Not hair, not a hat. Antlers. I sat staring at my laptop screen for maybe 10 minutes, trying to process this. The phenomenon had rules. It appeared in peripheral recording, the GoPro aimed at my camp, not directly at the shape. It disappeared from direct observation, my telephoto camera aimed straight at it. It was visible to my dark adapted eyes, but not to camera sensors pointed directly at its position. It had awareness of observation. Had to. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. I should have left immediately. Should have packed up all my equipment, driven off the playa, abandoned the shoot. But 4 thoughts kept me there. First, I had 4 more nights of shooting planned. Perfect weather, perfect new moon, a once-per-month opportunity. I had driven 6 hours, invested money in permits, allocated vacation time, professional commitment. Second, the astrophotography data I was capturing was exceptional. Award-worthy work, career-advancing work. Third, this phenomenon was potentially significant. If I could document it properly with multiple camera systems and controlled methodology, it could be important evidence, scientific value. Fourth, the shape hadn't approached, hadn't threatened, just stood there. Passive observation, maybe harmless. All 4 thoughts were rationalization. Looking back, I know that. But in the moment, exhausted and excited and professionally driven, they felt compelling. I decided to continue, keep shooting, document everything carefully. Night 2, May 4th. I spent the day reviewing all of Night 1's footage frame by frame, making detailed notes, trying to establish patterns and rules. What I knew, the shape appeared only after full darkness. It was visible to my dark adapted eyes. It appeared in the GoPro's peripheral recording but disappeared when cameras aimed directly at it. It stood at a 40-foot perimeter from my camp chair. It remained motionless for hours. What I didn't know, what it was, why it behaved this way, whether it was dangerous. I reconfigured my camera setup for Night 2, optimizing for documentation rather than just astrophotography. Primary camera. Still aimed at the galactic core for my main work, but I reduced the shooting frequency to conserve attention for monitoring. Secondary camera. Repositioned to aim directly at the 40-foot perimeter position, programmed to shoot one frame every 30 seconds all night. If the shape moved or changed, I'd have a complete record, even if the camera couldn't see it directly. GoPro. Repositioned slightly closer to my chair 8 feet instead of 10 and aimed to ensure the 40-foot perimeter was clearly visible in frame, programmed to shoot every 10 minutes instead of 20. More data points. New addition. I set up my iPhone on a small tripod, aimed at the perimeter, recording continuous video at 1080p resolution. Battery wouldn't last all night, but I'd get several hours of footage. 4 camera systems, overlapping coverage, different recording methods. If the shape did anything, I'd capture it. The shadow appeared at 8:54 p.m., 12 minutes earlier than night 1. It stood at the 40-foot perimeter. Same position, same vertical silhouette. Visible to my eyes, invisible to my direct-aimed cameras. I worked my astrophotography shoot, but I was distracted, constantly checking the GoPro footage on my laptop, reviewing the iPhone video feed, monitoring all systems. The night progressed. The Milky Way rose higher, rotated across the southern sky, set toward the western horizon. Standard celestial mechanics. I captured my planned shots, 12 different compositions of the galactic core, 200 frames for the time-lapse sequence. But my attention was divided. I was documenting 2 phenomena simultaneously, the ancient light of the Milky Way and the immediate presence of something that shouldn't exist. At 3:37 a.m., I downloaded the GoPro footage so far, 36 frames, shot at 10-minute intervals. I reviewed them in sequence. The first 20 frames showed the shape standing motionless at the 40-foot position, static, unchanging. Frame 21, captured at 2:20 a.m., showed something different. The shape had moved. Not repositioned instantaneously. Actually moved. The frame was slightly motion blurred, like the GoPro had captured mid-movement. In frame 20, the shape was at 40 feet. In frame 21, it was at 38 feet. In frame 22 to 30 a.m., it was back at 40 feet. Static again. It had approached 2 feet, then retreated. A test approach, checking boundaries. I felt adrenaline spike through my exhaustion. Frame 23 through 36 showed no further movement. The shape remained at 40 feet for the rest of the night. Dawn came at 5:42 a.m. I packed up exhausted, slept in my truck from 6:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Spent the afternoon analyzing the footage in detail, frame by frame review of every camera system. The motion blur in frame 21 suggested actual physical movement, not digital artifacts or sensor noise. Something had moved across the lake bed at 2:20 a.m. But my direct-aimed camera shooting the 40-foot position every 30 seconds showed no movement, just empty lake bed in every frame. The contradiction was maddening. The GoPro saw movement. My eyes saw the shape. But direct observation showed nothing. Night 3, May 5th. The shadow appeared at 8:41 p.m., 13 minutes earlier than Night 2. And it was closer. Not 40 feet anymore. 35 feet. A 5-foot advance from Night 2's maximum approach. It had retained the progress from its test approach. Had learned it could get closer. I documented everything. 4 camera systems running. Detailed logging of times and positions, scientific methodology applied to impossible phenomena. The night was clear, perfect astrophotography conditions. The Milky Way blazed across the sky with extraordinary clarity. I captured exceptional data. But I was running on minimal sleep now. 2 nights of fragmented rests, stress accumulating, focus deteriorating. At 1 a.m. I reviewed the GoPro footage so far. The shape had moved multiple times, progressive relocations, small advances and retreats, testing the perimeter. Frame sequence showed 35 feet at 9 p.m., 33 feet at 10:40 p.m., 35 feet at 11 p.m., 30 feet at 12:20 a.m., 32 feet at 12:50 a.m. It was experimenting, finding the boundary of how close it could approach. By dawn, 5:43 a.m., the GoPro's final frame showed it at 25 feet. A 10-foot advance over the course of one night. Pattern established. The shape was approaching progressively. Night 1 at 40 feet. Night 2, tested approach to 38 feet. Night 3, consolidated at 25 feet. Projected trajectory. Night 4 might bring it to 15 or 20 feet. Night 5, my last planned night, could bring it inside 10 feet. I should have left. The data was clear. The pattern was obvious. Something was closing distance methodically, night by night. But I was committed now. Professionally and psychologically, I needed to see how this resolved. Needed the complete data set. Needed to document the full sequence. Night 4, May 6th. I was running on fumes. 3 nights of minimal sleep. Constant stress. But the astrophotography work was the best of my career. The Milky Way shots I'd captured would define my portfolio for years. The shadow appeared at 8:33 p.m., 25 feet from my position. Close enough now that I could see details even without full dark adaptation. It stood there, motionless, patient. Through the night, I maintained my shooting schedule and monitoring protocols. 4 cameras documenting from different angles. At midnight, I aimed my primary camera directly at the shape, maximum zoom, 60-second exposure, ISO 32,000. The resulting image showed empty lake bed, just white alkaline crust, faintly lit by stars. But when I looked up from the camera, it was still there, 25 feet away, visible, real. The GoPro footage from night 4 showed the most dramatic movement yet. Around 2 a.m., the shape didn't just relocate, it walked. Frame sequence from 1:45 a.m. to 2:15 a.m. showed continuous movement, not instantaneous repositioning. Actual walking motion. Slow, deliberate steps across the lake bed. From 25 feet to 20 feet. 3 distinct advances of approximately 18 inches each, captured across 6 frames. Then it stopped at 20 feet and remained there for the rest of the night. By dawn, it was 20 feet from my camp chair. Pattern acceleration. The approaches were getting more aggressive, more confident. Whatever rules governed this phenomenon, they were changing, adapting to my presence. I had 1 night left. Night 5. My planned final night. Night 5, May 7th. My last planned night. I was barely functional. 4 nights of minimal sleep, accumulated stress creating a fog over my thoughts. But I'd committed to 5 nights. Had to finish the sequence. The shadow appeared at 8:27 p.m., 20 feet away now. Close enough that I could see it clearly, even without full dark adaptation. It stood there for hours, just standing, watching. Around midnight, I fell asleep in my camp chair. Didn't mean to, just passed out from exhaustion. I woke at 2:47 a.m. to find my GoPro had been moved. The camera had been on a tripod pointed back toward my camp chair. When I fell asleep, it was positioned 10 feet behind me. When I woke, it was positioned 5 feet behind me, still on its tripod, still recording, but relocated. I checked the footage immediately. The timestamp showed continuous recording, no gaps, no interruptions. At 2:19 a.m., while I was asleep in my chair, the footage showed the shadow moving, walking. Actual walking motion, not instantaneous relocation. Moving from 20 feet away to 15 feet, then 10 feet, then 5 feet, right up to my camp chair, standing directly behind me while I slept. The footage showed it reaching out, one arm extending, a hand with too many fingers stretching toward my shoulder. Then the frame glitched. Single frame of distortion. When the image cleared, the shadow was back at its 20-foot position, and the GoPro camera angle had shifted, like something had picked up the tripod, moved it closer to my chair, then returned to its position. I watched that sequence 10 times, zoomed in on every frame, enhanced the contrast and brightness. The shadow had touched me, had moved my camera, had been inches away while I was unconscious, then had chosen to retreat. Why? I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just sat in my camp chair, headlamp on red mode, watching the shadow stand at its 20-foot perimeter. Dawn came at 5:43 a.m. The shadow faded with the growing light. I packed up immediately. Didn't review footage, didn't organize equipment properly, just threw everything in my truck, collapsed the tent, loaded the cameras. By 7 a.m. I was driving across the lake bed, heading for the access road. I looked in my rearview mirror once. On the flat white expanse of Soda Lake, I could see a dark vertical shape standing where my camp had been, visible even in full daylight now, standing alone on the empty playa, watching me leave. I processed the footage over the next 2 weeks, working in my home office, door locked, reviewing hundreds of gigabytes of data frame by frame. 5 nights of astrophotography, 372 final images of the Milky Way, each one a 3-minute tracked exposure showing extraordinary detail. The galactic core in unprecedented clarity, nebulae visible that barely register to most cameras, star clusters resolved into individual points. This was the best technical work of my career. But the behind-the-scenes footage was something else entirely. I compiled it into a master sequence. 5 nights compressed into a 5-minute video, the GoPro frames stitched together chronologically, showing the shadow's progressive approach night by night. Night 1, standing at 40 feet, motionless for hours. Night 2, testing approach to 38 feet, then retreating. Night 3, multiple relocations, progressive tightening to 25 feet. Night 4, walking motion captured, approach to 20 feet. Night 5, the close approach while I slept, the camera relocation, the retreat. The pattern was undeniable in the compiled footage. Methodical, patient, deliberate. I showed it to 3 colleagues I trusted, absolutely. Professional photographers who'd worked with me for years, who understood camera systems, digital artifacts, post-processing manipulation. First colleague, a wedding photographer who specialized in low-light work, reviewed it on my laptop, scrubbing through frame by frame. She zoomed in on the shadow, checked the metadata, examined the exposure settings. "This is authentic," she said finally. "No manipulation. The shape is present in the raw frames, not added in post. The timestamps are consistent. The EXIF data matches your camera's settings." She looked at me carefully. "What was it?" "I don't know." Second colleague, an astrophotographer like me, 15 years of experience shooting dark sky locations, watched the compilation twice. Didn't speak, just watched. When it finished, he said, "I've shot Soda Lake 4 times. Never saw anything like this. But," he hesitated, "there's a reason I don't camp there anymore. Something about that location feels wrong after dark. I always drive out before sunset now." "Did you ever see shadows?" "Not like this. But I felt watched, like something was observing from the darkness. I thought it was paranoia from isolation." He paused. "This proves it wasn't paranoia." Third colleague, a forensic photographer who worked with law enforcement, expert in image authentication, analyzed it with professional software, checked for layer manipulation, examined pixel patterns, verified the frame-to-frame consistency. "This footage is genuine," he confirmed. "No digital manipulation, no compositing. The shape appears naturally in the frames as recorded by the camera." He looked up from his screen. "But I can't explain what it is. The behavior doesn't match any natural phenomenon I know. The way it appears in peripheral recording but disappears from direct observation violates basic optical principles." All 3 confirmed the same thing. The footage was authentic. The shape was real, at least as far as the cameras were concerned. None of them could explain it. I submitted the astrophotography work to competitions, won awards, got gallery shows. The images appeared in astronomy magazines and photography journals. I never mentioned the shadow footage publicly, but I keep it. Stored on encrypted drives, backed up in 3 locations, time-stamped and geotagged. Proof that something exists on Soda Dry Lake that doesn't behave according to known physical laws. I have been back to the Mojave since then, shot from other locations, but never Soda Lake. Can't bring myself to return. Sometimes I review the footage late at night, watch the shadow approach across 5 nights, watch it stand behind my chair while I sleep, watch it retreat at the last moment. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed for a 6th night, if the pattern had continued, if it had gotten close enough to do more than move a camera. Here's what I learned. If you're shooting astrophotography in remote desert locations and you see shadows that don't match any objects, shadows that appear in your background footage but disappear when aimed at directly, pack up immediately. Don't rationalize it. Don't try to document it. Don't convince yourself you can capture proof with one more night of shooting, because whatever creates those shadows understands patience better than we do, understands how to appear and disappear, understands that photographers will stay for the perfect shot, and it knows exactly how many nights it takes to close a 40-foot distance to zero.